believe this. I don't believe you.
Finally, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, a man allowed his 8-year-old daughter to take the wheel of his car, and an accident ensued that damaged 7 other cars and injured 6 people, which once again proves my theory: women can't drive.
You've admitted that you're lazy. I think you've read 6 books in your life.
I've read 6.
6. What kind of a woman would be attracted to you, do you think?
Well, I have a lot of money. WNBA officials expanded to 10 teams this week, adding franchises in Detroit and Washington, D.C. But before you get too excited about the new additions to the league, remember, all of the players are still women. They stink at basketball. That's the problem.
Welcome, everyone, to Read Out. I am your host, one of your hosts, James Barrow, and joining me today are Christian and John, as usual. Christian, how you doing tonight?
Good, man. Good. Good Sunday. Went to church. Got some stuff done around the house. Read a bit. It was a good day.
Excellent. What are you drinking?
The gas station at the corner didn't have my Labatt Blues, so just Miller tonight, bud. Yeah. We're downgrading.
Hey, at least it's a beer.
Yep.
At least I don't feel lonely drinking, being the only one drinking. It's basically drinking alone. If you're
Yep.
All right, John, how are you doing tonight?
Good. Yeah, much the same. I went to church this morning. I had a good time. One of the kids was being a little problematic, so I just kind of wandered around the church with my 1-year-old as he screamed in the hallways. And then came home and I took a nap until 6 o'clock. So it's a day's already blown by.
Fair enough. Sometimes I feel like that's what Sundays are for. A good
Mhm.
Sunday
Also,
nap.
James, I think your mic is coming in a little low. Is that just me?
Yeah, he's a little low.
Testing.
Okay, yeah, because I don't even see your dots popping up in StreamYards.
All right, let me check real quick. Audio. Oh, it's coming through the wrong microphone. Yep. There we go. Is that better?
Oh.
Oh, yeah.
Too hot?
Oh, yeah.
Better? All right.
I adjusted it down. I think we should be good there.
Yep.
All right. I thought we tested it beforehand, but there we go.
My mom just texted me that your mic is too soft this week.
Hi, Mom. John's mom. Fantastic. So yeah, what are you drinking, John?
Well, I have the remnants of a white haze, the best flavor of rain. But yeah, other than that,
Excellent.
it's water.
You know, I have not actually tried any of the rains. I've been pretty boring in my experimentation into energy drinks. I drink standard Red Bull and standard Monster. Occasionally, I'll drink like a diet Red Bull.
Are we talking green
Diet
Monster?
Red Bull?
What's that?
Are we talking green Monster or white
Yeah.
Monster?
No, green.
Okay, because white zero is the standard.
I
All
know
Yeah.
it's
Let's
become the
replace.
standard, right? Yes.
I saw
Yeah,
everyone
that's
ranting and raving about that new Apple Monster, and I tried it, and it was pretty good, actually. Wasn't
It
too
was
bad.
good, but those things have like 300 calories or 250 calories because there's like 40 grams of sugar in them.
Yeah, I
And
usually
so
don't drink the sugar ones.
Yeah, I had it once and I was like, that was all right, but I'm never gonna have it again.
Yeah. All right. Says James is quiet. But okay, hopefully that was an old comment. All right. Yeah, so I am drinking this. I'm not sure exactly what it is. You can read it for me, but just a bourbon I picked up in there you go. Something I picked up in Minneapolis when I was there for one of my jobs this week, and there we go.
There
There
you
you
go.
go.
It's good. It's
If Logan is here, he can tell us whether it's good or not.
there we go. Yeah.
Logan has a 10 grand collection of whiskey.
Wow.
Fantastic. I do like being validated when I mention something in the chat. All right, so today we've got a good stream. I think we've got a couple different topics we can hit on, but the main one is Doug Wilson talking to Ross Douthat, or I think Douthat is how you pronounce his name. He is a New York Times opinion journalist, I believe. One of the few there that it's kind of shocking they've kept him there. He's conservative, but he's very normie conservative, right? And so he's asking Doug Wilson, who's a self-proclaimed Christian nationalist, although not nearly as Christian nationalist as some people would like him to be, but asking him sort of the questions, the tough questions that normies have for people of the Christian nationalist mindset. And so I think there will be some diversity even on this panel in terms of what are sort of the best political stances there. But I think it'll be fun to filter our thoughts through this conversation between this normie and this Christian nationalist. And we've done some Doug Wilson clips before, so I think this audience should be somewhat familiar with his content. So I think it'll be an interesting stream, and I'm looking forward to getting into it.
Heck yeah. Yeah, I think we all fall slightly differently in terms of political beliefs or how far we want to go with Christian nationalism, right?
Right.
But this guy on the right, I don't know if you guys have seen his interview with the who's the Peter Thiel. That's the guy, the JD Vance mentor and the gay transhumanist. But this expression comes up all the time. This kind of like mildly indignant / annoyed. This is his RBF.
Yeah. No, he's kind of charming. I like Ross quite a bit.
And then for people who don't know, what's the background on Doug Wilson?
So Doug Wilson, if you go back to one of our streams, we talked about there was a CNN interview that he did. He runs a church in Moscow, Idaho, and it's a small town, but his congregation, I feel like, takes up about 20% of the town. So they are a major force in that area, and a lot of people migrate to that neck of the woods specifically to join one of his churches, or that sort of group of churches that are all part of the same organization. And he's been known to have some hot takes. And during COVID, the reach of his organization significantly increased because he was saying things that other people weren't willing to say, and he was just willing to speak truth about COVID and just the ways that the government was taking power. And he had a lot of people resonated with his message, and so they've just continued to grow. And currently, there is even one of their kind of satellite churches in DC, which apparently I think not JD Vance, but the DoD secretary attends or has attended. So he's gotten some recent political interest because people see him as a heavy influence on the presidency, which is probably exaggerating things a little bit. I think he talks about it in this interview, but even still, he's taken it in stride and feels that any way that they can expand their reach is a good thing and potential to grow the kingdom, because he is a Christian nationalist and he's a post millennial on top of that in terms of his eschatology, and so he sees Christendom as being a continually growing feature of Christianity. So yeah, I think that's enough background.
Sweet. I was on the wrong screen there.
You are in your own distinctive way very online and speaking some of the language of that world. I just wrote down a few: lumberjack dykes, small-breasted biddies, gay-tard.
Yes.
Yeah, it sounds like my Discord.
Lumberjack.
Although,
dyke.
yeah, so there was another thing that we covered where he was getting some pushback from, I think it was Gavin Ortland, right?
Yeah.
Some piety signaling for some of the language that he's used about women. Very mild, but also kind of strange, I suppose, for a pastor, right? For some of his fiction writing. I think I've never read his stuff, but some of his fiction writing.
Yeah, Mosey Wells says, yes, I'm listening.
Oh yeah, got my attention.
Do you want me to defend it?
Evangelical pastor Douglas Wilson doesn't seem to mind if you call him a theocrat.
I like to see the nation be a Christian nation. I like to see the world be a Christian world.
He wants a society that acknowledges Jesus' authority over politics.
Marriage and the family were created by God, by the Supreme Being, not by the Supreme Court.
And patriarchal authority in the home.
Wives look up to their husbands as the church does to Christ.
Is he just being hyped by his critics as a Trump-era villain?
Doug Wilson and his church admit.
Well, so I don't know if they're like trying to paint him in the intro as some sort of like, look at these crazy takes. He wants to live in a Christian country, a Christian world. And like, as a Christian, it's like, as opposed to what?
Right.
Like, no, as a Christian, you know, I'd really like it if the world was more pagan.
Yeah.
Could we be more atheist? I would love to. I think we should be less Christian. It's
I
like,
almost
as
feel
a
like
Christian,
we're
it's like
living
what?
the alternative right now, honestly.
Correct.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. It's like we've seen the opposite of that. Can we have the other thing now? Let's try it the other way.
That one of their goals is to infiltrate the Trump administration because they want Christian dominion of the world.
I see it as a dominionist cult.
Or does American Christianity's future...
Sorry. A dominionist cult?
That's a girl, dude. You can just...
Well, but like,
just move on.
Does that mean somebody who wants...
Nonsensical.
See, that's silly, because a lot of these people are like, oh, you want Christians to have power. It's like, as opposed to non-Christians to have power? Like, if somebody has to have power, well then, yes, I would rather it be the Christian. Of course. Of course.
Future really lie with a recovery of its zealous Puritan past.
Don't play with fire, but burn whatever bridges you need to burn.
Doug has a whole
Okay,
series of these.
I don't know where that clip is from, but I need that as a reaction clip.
That's
pretty
real
good.
fire. That's not like
great.
AI. That's not.
Dude,
That's real. That's great, dude.
Yeah.
That's
so
awesome.
every November, he and his I don't remember when they started this, but they do this thing called No Quarter November, and basically you know, like no quarter, like the pirate phrase, they'll take no quarter. And so basically the rules are they don't have to go out of their way to be offensive, but they aren't allowed to qualify any of their statements. And so they'll just say things, and then they won't do all of the like qualifications that everyone does. And so, but he always launches No Quarter November with a video that features fire at some point. And so like in one of his, he's sitting on a couch and he like puts out his cigar next to him, and the couch just lights up in flames, and he's just sitting there for half the video with the fire going on. And yeah, it's a real pyrotechnics. Yeah.
That's
All
cool.
right.
Fire's cool.
Oh, I just noticed that they called it the Effin Bridge, EFFIN, the Effin Bridge.
Doug Wilson, welcome to Interesting Times.
Thanks for having me.
So we're going to try and talk about some pretty meaty things.
Okay.
Obviously, your vision for America as a Christian nation. But I wanted to start with a conversation about some of your theological beliefs.
Okay.
Because I thought it would be helpful to ground the audience.
Frame the whole thing.
Frame the conversation for
Sorry,
when we turn to politics.
Can we go back to this comment? Not that one. This one. What is that? A comment?
That's for
what does
you,
that
yeah.
mean? That's horribly
So,
insulting.
well,
is that a comment on my looks or my personality or voice?
I think
what is
somebody,
that?
I think earlier he said you talk fast like Destiny, but you kind of have like I mean, generically, you kind of have a similar face shape to Richard Spencer, and like you dress nice and your hair is kind of similar, but I wouldn't. That is a funny combination. Richard Spencer plus Destiny.
I don't take much joy in it.
Although, I mean, given this guy's spelling ability, I don't know if Dub he misspelled Destiny and Spencer.
Desting.
Desting.
All right.
And also, I'm just interested.
Okay.
So let's start off with a pretty basic question.
All right.
We are both Christians.
Right.
I'm a Roman Catholic. You are a evangelical Protestant, but specifically a Reformed evangelical.
Right.
Presbyterian, Calvinist.
Yeah.
Calvinist would be
all that.
Right. So our traditions have had some pretty sharp differences in the past, like wars of religion.
Right. That's happened.
That's happened. And, you know, the people involved in those conflicts thought that there were really serious eternal stakes involved, right? That respectively Catholics and Protestants were leading people into serious error, putting people at risk of damnation.
Right.
So, simple question. Do you think I'm going to hell?
That's not my job.
I know. It's not your job to know. That's true.
So let me put reframe the question and then answer it straight up. I believe that there are many Roman Catholics who are saved and going to heaven. So I also believe there are many Presbyterians who aren't. So the last day where the Lord separates wheat from tares, sheep from goats, is not going to be, there's not going to be denominational lines.
Right.
So I believe that salvation is the gift of God, and as the gift of God, he bestows it on whom he will. And when he does that, the fruit of the Spirit is the result. So there are Roman Catholics with whom I can fellowship with as brothers in Christ, and there are people who are just in an alien world from me. So that doesn't answer the question about you and me, because we just met, right? But
that's fair.
But there's
we'll see. Well, I'll ask it again at the end of the interview.
Oh yeah, definitely you're going to heaven. Yeah. So really, God is the one who makes that determination. If we're to be saved, he's going to have to do all the saving. So the illustration I like to give is if you died and went up to heaven and St. Peter had a desk there with a justification by faith alone test, gave you a pencil and said, here, take the test, and you need to get 100 on the test and we'll let you into heaven. If the way you pass the test is you look at the test and you look at the pencil and then you give the pencil back. And he says, very good. It's not test taking, it's not works of the law, and it's not doctrinal works of the law either.
So what is it?
It's Christ. Christ is our salvation. Abandon yourself, drop it, let go of yourself, turn away from sin and self and all the me, and look to Christ.
But when you do that, what you're really saying, I think, right, is that all you can advise people to do is to try and come to a deeper awareness of something that God has decided for them.
Correct. Now, but when God decides things like that, God is not a muscle-bound Zeus, like a Calvinist Zeus in the upper reaches of the cosmos, making people do stuff. A Calvinist Zeus that would be problematic. He'd be a bully. And so when God determines who's saved and who not, and God determines who turns left and who turns right, in him we live and move and have our being. And so God can do that without turning us into puppets. And that's the charge against Calvinists, is that they have a muscle-bound Zeus who's pulling the puppet strings. But I don't think of that way at all.
Well, that's one charge against Calvinists, right? But a different one would be that, that you have a God who is creating human beings as characters in a larger story that he's telling, which is something that I personally believe, right? But who is also creating people who will do terrible things, creating people who will be damned.
Yes.
Right? And so the common critique against Calvinism is, doesn't this God, whether or not he's a nightclub bouncer or Zeus or anything like that, right? But isn't this a pretty harsh thing to do, to sit down and create characters in a story who are going to go to hell?
Correct. I would say not harsh, but it's certainly hard, right? It's Paul says in Romans, behold the kindness and severity of God. God as the God of the Bible is no buttercup. So when God creates the story in which villains are villains and bad people are bad people, he can do that without sullying his hands. The way I preach it is that God draws straight with crooked lines. God is so powerful that he can create a narrative, a story.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, he's just kind of going over basic Calvinism, which is fine. One question I always have for Catholics, and this is interesting because you have a Catholic and a Protestant talking, is their take on Calvinism and just predestination more broadly, which in these sorts of conversations is what people mean by Calvinism, right? Calvinism is much more than simply predestination, and it's even more than the 5 points of TULIP. If anything, Calvinism could maybe be reduced to the 4 books of Calvin's Institutes, which is sort of his systematic theology. But Christian, question for you. I don't know that we've talked about this much. as a Catholic, what is your perspective on predestination? Because I know that, Thomists tend to be more pro predestination. They tend to be pretty closely aligned to Calvinists, whereas there are a lot of other camps within Catholicism that tend to have different perspectives. So have you thought much about this question?
I haven't done a lot of research, but personally, I think that predestination kind of negates the concept of free will, at least in my opinion. I don't know.
Well, logically, it seems like it must. So anyone that really believes in predestination, well, most anyone who believes in predestination, and certainly any Calvinists, are going to affirm some form of free will.
I think depending on how far you take it, almost leads you down a path of nihilism. It's like, well, I don't have a choice with anything in my life, then what's the point,
Determinism, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, logically, I'm pretty convinced that we don't have a way to really make rational sense of it.
Sure.
It's kind of like the Trinity. It's kind of like a number of those mysteries where we just have to at some point say, hold these two things as being true and hold them in tension. Similar, the best example that I can think of is the one from natural science, where it's like we seem to have a theory of gravity in Newtonian physics that seems to work for pretty much everything until all of a sudden we realize that some things aren't explained by Newtonian physics, and quantum physics actually seems to explain things equally well from a different perspective, and which one is correct is sort of this open question, although people tend to view that neither one can perfectly explain all the phenomena that we see. And so there's this need for a theory of everything that can actually unite these two theories in natural science and finally explain all of the phenomena that we experience with one law. That's kind of how, but we've never determined it, and it seems that the two theories cannot coexist. And so we need this tertium quid. We need this third thing to come in and explain it all. That's kind of how I see free will and predestination. They don't seem like they can possibly coexist, but we experience and we certainly see the biblical data to support both. And so we have to just accept both and hold them in tension.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that.
I think it's very complicated because as somebody who was raised very Calvinist, the Orthodox position on it is more secondary causes, right? So God allows things to happen rather than forcing everything to happen. So there are certainly things that God has caused to happen, but then there's these secondary causes that God allows to happen, and that's where our free will comes into play. So it's almost both, right? So it's like, yes, you have free will, and things are set in motion that cannot be undone, right?
Clavin said something in Andrew Clavin, who we've done streams on before, said something in a recent stream about how, in his view, and Clavin is not a theologian, so his views aren't always orthodox, but I think this is similar to what you're describing. And I think it is a basically valid take, although it's not necessarily what everyone will say in terms of some of the more orthodox views. But basically, we have free will in the sense that God doesn't predetermine what we do, but God does perfectly take what we do and use it for his perfect plan. And so it's almost like, because Clavin is a novelist, he thinks of it in novelist terms. When a novelist is writing a book, he kind of, if you create a realistic character, sometimes the character will do things that you don't actually want him to do. Like, you want the story to go one way, but the character, if he's going to be true to his character that you've created, right, because God is still the creator, then he's going to do this other thing. And so you have to let him, as the novelist, do that thing and then figure out how to work it into your overall plot. I don't think that you can carry that line of reasoning all the way in order to really remove God's control, even in the nitty gritty, right? Because the Bible does say that not a hair falls from your head without the will of the Father. So I don't think you can take that perspective to deny his intervening in the very basic elements of our lives. But I do think that is one helpful way to look at how maybe this all goes together. Is there is, that this free will that is totally within God's power to control and totally within his purview and supervision, and yet somehow he's just sort of weaving it all into his grand plan while still letting us do our thing. It's really tough. And even just from a natural science perspective, I think basically if you're a materialist, you have to deny free will, because every effect has a cause in a materialist society, and you just trace the cause and effect chains back, and eventually you're going to get you have to accept a determinist perspective. So even the thoughts that you have that you think that you're having are caused by something else, and so I think it's very hard to account for free will, really even consciousness at all, but certainly free will with a materialist perspective. And so I think that the secularists have an even tougher problem. But you know, the theists have also a very tough problem if you're going to believe in a God that has complete sovereignty and has a plan. It's really hard to reconcile that with any notion of free will. So it is one of the great questions.
And I think it's also complicated for us as we see time, cause, and effect as like linear things that are happening in a line versus quite literally being outside of that, and everything has already happening and is always happening, right? So it's one thing to say, like, we view it as, oh, am I forced to do this thing? Well, it's like, if you take yourself outside of time, that thing has already happened, right? You've already done that thing.
Yeah, that is certainly true as well.
Well, yeah, and so Asian Michelada's review says, I deny the concept of free will. I can make a novel case. This is how I lost my faith and got tired of the liars. I think if you are an atheist or a secular perspective, I think it leads you down determinism, nihilism. Like eventually, at some point, with a algorithm so advanced, you could plot the rest of humanity, right? If you could control all the variables, you could quite literally predict the future in this worldview.
And let's not forget, that view made a lot more sense prior to the advent of quantum physics, right? When Newtonian physics was the hot new thing, this is when we had Darwinism coming onto the scene and Freudianism and all these these perspectives that tried to reduce everything down to the material because it seemed like everything would be explainable. Because all of a sudden, the breakthrough of Newton was one theory, gravity and sort of these laws, these three laws of motion, just like one ultimate theory of motion that explained the motion of the heavens as well as the motion of a billiard ball, and the motion of us, of our inner workings, of even the chemistry within our cells. You know, a theory that explained everything was so novel and basically, for a lot of people, removed the necessity of God, right? Leibniz, who came up with his own kind of version of calculus, I think about the same time as Newton, but independently, I think. He, I think, was showing Napoleon some of his mathematical calculations, and Napoleon's like, well, where does God come into this? And Leibniz says, well, I didn't need God to make the calculation work. And that was a very common perspective at the time, that you didn't really need God. All of a sudden, our science had advanced so far. Fast forward to the future, and when you start getting Einstein and really post-Einstein, when quantum physics comes onto the scene, it starts to throw a little bit of a wrench, where all of a sudden it doesn't seem like everything's quite as explainable. It does seem like there is, Einstein's big objective to quantum physics, from what I understand, is, God doesn't play dice. God doesn't leave things up to chance, and it seemed like quantum physics was allowing for this uncertainty. So anyways, all that to say that I think our Newtonian conception, which so much of modernity is built on in terms of the secular culture, has started to crumble, and I think that's something people forget.
In which creatures rebel against him, and they are responsible for that rebellion, and God is in complete control of the whole thing.
But why not pull them back? Like just to take an alternative theory, right?
Okay,
an alternative Christian theory would say there are still going to be opportunities for repentance and moments when grace is offered.
Right.
And if they refuse grace, then yes, God is, as you say, severe and allows them to make that refusal and maybe be damned eternally because of it. But there is an opportunity, a path that is open for every human being, even the people who might end up in hell.
So we live in one hell of a screwed up world. Right? There are horrendous things going on right this second, right this minute, all over the globe. There are kids being abused. There are people being trafficked. There are wars erupting. There are rapes. There are murders. This world is a screwed up planet. And a reasonable sophomore would say, and who put it here? Who's responsible for all this? I mean, ultimately, fundamentally, who did this? Well, the answer is God. Basically, there's no slipping off the point. All Orthodox Christians are stuck with the problem of evil. And the only people who feel.
Do you know when he says Orthodox Christian, he's not talking about the denomination. He's just talking about like Trinitarian Christians in general, right?
Yeah, for sure.
The force of that and try to get out of it are the openness process theologians, the openness of God people, where they say God's not in control, really. So that's how we justify him. He's not in control. But every Orthodox Christian believes that God's in control and decided to create the world with all of its gunk anyway. And so at some level, God's responsible. The thing that distinguishes the Calvinist is that the Calvinist acknowledges that and speaks right into the microphone and says, yes, God is involved.
So talk about the political project that comes out of this. And you have, the phrase Christian nationalism gets thrown around a lot these days. And you have been willing to take full ownership of the phrase.
Correct.
So
I prefer that phrase to what I usually get called,
which is a theocrat.
Yeah.
And we'll get to that. Yeah. But first, give me just your definition of Christian nationalism.
Christian nationalism is the conviction that secularism is a failed experiment, that societies require a transcendent grounding in order to be able to function at all. And as a Christian, I believe that transcendent ground should be the living God and not an idol. That would be my short form definition of Christian nationalism. Even shorter would be.
So I think it's a fair point to just go around the panel. John, do you think that that's, I guess, a fair definition of Christian nationalism, and would you agree with it?
All right, let's back it up 10 seconds.
Yeah, please.
Get it in full.
In order to be able to function at all. And as a Christian, I believe that transcendent ground.
Okay, we
get to that. Yeah. But first, give me just your definition of Christian nationalism.
Christian nationalism is the conviction that secularism is a failed experiment, that societies require a transcendent grounding in order to be able to function at all. And as a Christian, I believe that transcendent ground should be the living God and not an idol. That would be my short form definition of Christian nationalism. Even shorter would be Christian nationalism is the conviction that we should stop making God angry.
And so that's the...
See, that seems too simple, I suppose. And I mean, I don't even fully agree with it, because you've had non-Christian societies that have lasted for a long time. But I would simply say that the best societies, the best nations are going to be the one in tune with God's law the closest, right? So whatever that might be. And also, I think something that Doug misses completely is that I think there just by definition has to be an ethnic component to nations, right? I think nations are downstream of a ethnicity, right? For the most part. Now there's some overlap, and there's different empires and whatnot where you have various ethnicities that participate in it, and they can last a really long time. But I think that is still a integral component of it, I don't think it's possible in our flesh to get away from that. So I think it's kind of silly to skip that component.
Okay, Christian, what do you think?
A question I would have is, how would you make Christian nationalism work in America with the amount of denominations that we have? Like, how would that be structured ideally? I don't know.
I think that's part of why I like that definition. I think that's a definition I can get on board with, and many I can't. Probably the ones that stress the more ethnic component in the definition. I'm not denying, I think, what you said, John, and I'll get back to that in a second. But I think this definition is perhaps broad and loose enough where it's basically, it's more, you can define it more by what it's not. And I think that's where Wilson is saying it is a reaction to secularism. It's basically, you could define it as secularism has failed, and we should return to a society that does believe in God, and as a Christian, that should be the Christian God. I think that That much I can get behind. Now, exactly how you apply that is a tricky thing. I think that what you were talking about, John, of sort of aligning our laws with God's laws is important. It's tricky as well, and many Christians have tried something like that and run into issues, some kind of unintended negative consequences that I think if we were to try again, we would want to avoid. Certain excesses of the Puritans, certain well, they get into it in the interview, but I think it comes down to a distinction between what is legal and what is sin. Like what should be against the law, and what is considered sin by a society. Those two things don't necessarily overlap perfectly, and shouldn't actually overlap perfectly in a Christian society. Or at least that's a point that Doug makes, and I think I agree with. But so I like how this definition is opposing secularism, which I think is a failed experiment in many ways, while still maintaining a certain degree of freedom and not specifying a particular denomination or a particular.
I think it's very palatable.
View. It's palatable, exactly.
Right.
So,
but
which I think
the thing
could be a
which
criticism.
which I'm concerned about is like you replace this secularism with like a generic Christianity, even though the three of us on the panel wouldn't necessarily agree with what that means, right?
What that looks like, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Right. So I think what a term that Doug uses, I don't know if he uses it in this interview, but he has used it many other times. Actually wrote a book by the name Mere Christendom, which is a play on C.S. Lewis's book Mere Christianity, right? And so a Christendom that is not exclusive of a particular denomination, but is, we all do see the foundation of our government as being a transcendent being, and that transcendent being is the Christian God. I think that's about as exclusive as I could get behind. I think once you start getting more than that, you start to violate my convictions around the value of denominationalism. Now, I do think that the universal church is actually a collection of people that disagree on doctrine, because I think that a fundamental part of the human experience is uncertainty and living out in faith, regardless of the fact that we don't know for sure whether our doctrines are correct. And so I think that we should allow for that. And as an American, I have a certain red-blooded appreciation for freedom, and even the freedom to do what someone else might think is wrong. Then, to some degree, even the freedom to do what you think is wrong, because if you are compelled to do what you think is right and don't have the option to do what's wrong, then I'm not sure that that's actually freedom, which is a slightly different definition of freedom than Catholics tend to have. Catholics tend to see freedom as the freedom to do the good and not the evil, right? The person who's a slave to sin is not free, which is also true. So it's a more complicated issue than that. But I do think that when you're compelled to give to charity, is that really charity? No, that's just stealing. You have to have the option to not give to charity in order for charity to even exist. And I think in the same way, you have to have the option to do the bad in order to make the good even good, right? If you're just being forced to do something good, I'm not even sure that it's good in a real sense, or certainly as good as it otherwise could be. And one little hint that I think we see in Scripture for the value that God places on freedom is the fact of the fall, where I think God, the existence of evil, while there's no perfect Christian answer to it, all sound Christian answers to the problem of evil involve some element of freedom. And so I think to me that says that freedom is such an important thing to God fundamentally that he was willing to sacrifice his son in order to allow for that degree of freedom and accept the consequences, the negative consequences that come with that as well. Kind of all over the place there, but go ahead.
There you go. So Farvin Estacola says, I'd be interested to see how Wilson reconciles this view with the concept that Christians are to be in this world but not of it. Governments and nations are inherently of this world. Now, what I will say is that a Christian nation is not a worldly nation. It is antithetical to the world, right? So it's like we as individual Christians should be in the world but not of it. we as Christian communities should be in the world but not of it. And you just take that to its logical extension, which is that Christian nations, like if we want to be a Christian people, a Christian society, we should be in the world, participating in the world, but not of it, right? So it's just an extension of the individual. An extension of a Christian family should be a part of the world, but not of the world, right? Or in the world, but not of the world, right? So you just take that to its logical largest extension, which would be a Christian nation, Christian empire, right? Which would stand against the rest of the world.
So what do you think about this, though? Because there's a counterpoint to that perspective, where once you start to get a nation, you actually have to wonder if a nation should behave in the same way that an individual Christian should, right? Like an individual Christian can and is actually called to sacrifice his life for for the good or for a principle.
So are nations, yeah.
I think that's basically. Is it to the same degree, right? Where like a Christian is called at times, not every single Christian, but to give up all that he has and including all his material things, right there. Whereas a nation, what I'm trying to say is a nation has an interest, almost by definition of being a nation, in self-existing, right? Like there is an importance on the nation continuing, whereas as an individual Christian, you don't actually have that need because you are an eternal spirit and you will go to be with God, whereas a nation doesn't have that benefit. And so a nation doesn't have the benefit of the martyrdom that I think an individual Christian does, right? Like you don't want your nation to operate that way.
Correct, but at the same time, we could use that same argument against like churches, or like, what if I was like talking to the Pope and I was like, hey, you gotta sell everything you own and come follow Christ. So I need the Catholic Church to sell all holdings everywhere. Like you can't operate as an individual Christian, as a church. Same thing with like my local pastor. If I was like, oh, by the way, you should sell this church building and everybody in the community. It's like, of course, we understand that like community, there's a difference there, right? I think we are called as individuals and the nation is called to sacrifice, but maybe in just slightly different ways, right? Because I mean, committing suicide is not Christianity, right?
I mean, Thomas Jefferson said the U.S. Constitution is not a suicide pact, and the context for that was the Louisiana Purchase, because he recognized, because Jefferson was a very small government guy, he recognized that he really didn't have the authority to sign the Louisiana Purchase, and yet he saw it as being really essential to our national interests and clearly in our national interests. And so I think the idea that Constitution is not a suicide pact is to say that the Constitution is in service of the nation, and we are not bound to it in the case of an existential crisis or in the case of certain extreme situations. So yeah, I think there's some wisdom there, although it can be abused and disputed in the details for sure.
Mm-hmm. I mean, fundamentally, I think it comes down to power, right? So if we agree in the concept of a nation, we would want it to be more Christian, right? Whatever that means. And if we're going to be part of a nation, do we want to be ruled secularly or like theistically? And in my perspective, it would be by Christians, right? I would want Christians to be the dominant force within society. Right. As simple as that is. Like that would be as simple as I would go. I want Christians to be the dominant force in society. I'm not saying that we strip other people of all of their rights, but we say Christianity is the dominant force within society, and that is our guiding light, our North Star, if you will, to quote Lena Mitchell.
Okay, Lena, yeah.
What the Reformed Renegade quote or comment? I'm curious, Reformed Renegade, what you would want, because you're not Catholic, you're Protestant. So, what's the alternative? What is the Protestant alternative to mere Christendom?
I think he followed it up with Stephen Wolfe's book is Superior. I haven't read either.
Oh, he's talking
books.
about the book Mere Christendom is bad. Gotcha. Okay, all right. I mean, that could be true. I enjoyed it. I thought it had some good parts. Didn't really follow the book, but
James, have you answered yet what your preferred?
I don't know that.
I mean, like,
my preferred what?
So let's break it down. You believe in the concept of a nation, that God sets up nations. Yeah. So would you want that society to be who do you want to be the dominant force in society? Because we agree that power has to be held by someone, by some group of people, right? The levers of power exist, unless you take the libertarian position and say that nobody should hold the levers of power, but I just don't think that works.
Yeah.
Right? If the levers of power have to be held by someone, by some group of people, who do we give them to?
Christians. Yeah. People that believe in the one true God. Yeah, I mean, if you phrase it that way, and I'm not sure that that's a fair phrasing, but I
It's
also
pretty
don't...
broad, but yeah.
It is. That's as simple as I can make it, right?
Yeah.
That is the most broad. Like, generically, I wish that Christians are the dominant, like, whether that's 51%, whatever. I wish that Christians is the dominant force in society, right?
Right. Yeah, no, I 100% agree with that. I think that it's tricky in terms of how
the details are where it gets messy.
The details are really tricky.
Yeah,
and
100%.
I'm a huge fan of the U.S. Constitution. I think that they did a really good job framing it. And I also think that, Adams was right when he said the Constitution is made for a moral and upright society and won't really work for any other. It's not going to work if you transplant a bunch of Muslims here and, it's just not going to function the same way. It's not really going to function at all. So I do think that it requires a Christian-based foundation in order to operate correctly. And there's more than Christianity that goes into the founding of the nation. There's a lot of Roman law, a lot of English common law, which those are actually two very different systems of law, which is pretty fascinating. But I think that our structure of laws is built around both, actually. Roman law being very code-based, very, written codes, whereas common law is all precedent. And our system integrates both and takes them both very seriously, but tends to lean more towards British common law in terms of which one is more important. And so that's why you'll find laws that are on the books that so they're statutes, but they're actually completely ineffective statutes because they've never been enforced, and so that precedent actually nullifies them. It's the details get really tricky, and it's not to say that our Constitution, lower C Constitution, the makeup of our country is completely Christian, but it definitely has a lot of Christian elements, and I think even the things that aren't obviously Christian are derived from Christian principles. And overall, Christianity has had a huge influence throughout our history, even in terms of the abolition of slavery. And it's not like all the abolitionists were Christians, but ultimately,
that's where the moral core came from, though.
Exactly.
I mean, people who try to deny the Christian influence on the West in general, I think that's a fool's errand.
Yeah.
All right.
First purpose of your political project for America to stop making God angry.
Yes. And most people think that when they are confronted with that project that we have, is they think that we want to get our tentacles into everything and start controlling everything. I actually think we need limited government. The government should be significantly smaller than it is, and we need to curtail a lot of the busybodiness that we have. And so that's why I would call myself a theocratic libertarian. There is a true libertarian element in this, and yet the transcendent grounding for what we're talking about means that we acknowledge the authority of God. And
never ask a libertarian about the age of consent laws.
We have racked up quite a body count of awful crimes, and I believe the only way out is for us to repent and turn to Christ. So, and repentance and turning to Christ would be things like no more pride parades, no more drag queen story hours, no more abortion on demand, no more legalized same-sex unions, all of that done. That's the repentance part. Okay.
By law.
By law. But I've been ministering, preaching for coming up on 50 years. And when I first began ministering, homosexual behavior was against the law. And that was not a totalitarian hellhole. That was not the Handmaid's Tale. It was a free and prosperous country that I was grateful to God to be growing up in. And yet we had, as a society, disapproved.
Free except for people who are arrested for sodomy. Right. It
yeah.
was not a free society for them.
Yeah.
Right.
Or also not free for forgers and burglars
Right.
and bank robbers, and not free for them either.
Right.
Right. So, but every society has a set of standards, and if you don't have laws at all, you don't have a society. And so that
is true. I don't think America is in danger of not having laws. Right.
Correct.
So the question.
I mean, I kind of, there's another component to this where you have this, when we talk about America currently, where we have this multi-tiered system almost. And like, it's almost mini balkanized in a way. Like somebody earlier in the chat said, well, Muslims aren't ripping up the Constitution. And I'm like, well, in areas where they have power, they almost certainly are. But I mean, it's like different counties, different states have like, if I have a self-defense shooting in my state and district, I'm pretty fine. If I was somewhere else, would not be fine. If there's an activist judge that because I killed a heckin' minority or something like that, it's like you're going to jail forever because, you know, whatever it might be. But on top of that, I just lost my train of thought. Gosh dang it. I had a point there that I was going to move to.
That's okay. Yeah, I had an idea as well, but there was a comment earlier. Let's see, I think I started. Just always curious about these statements because I don't know what the context was here. But
yeah, I'm not sure.
If you can elaborate, Full Metal Jacket, I would appreciate it. I'm curious what tradition I am either making up or rejecting, or making up and then rejecting. Either way, okay. If you want to clarify, I'm curious. And then we also got a super chat. Thank you very much. Sea Runner, 1277. Nation equals blood plus soil plus language plus culture. Kind of. Yeah.
And I mean, I think he's correct there about nations for sure. There's an ethnic component to it. There's a locality to it, and language and culture kind of go hand in hand with that. So I think he's correct about a nation.
I think
there.
the question is, to what percent do you want to elevate those different components? And there might be other components as well. I don't know that this is an exhaustive list, but I do think that the American nation does have a unique blood component because we are built from so many different ethnicities, and so I think that going forward is still a part of our culture and a part of our makeup, our ethnic makeup is allowing for a certain amount of diversity and even a certain amount of assimilation. I think the way to control that and prevent it from being just the Wild West, where you can just transplant a bunch of Muslims into Dearborn, and now you have a little Sharia, and you say, oh, they're just as American as anyone else, or calls to prayer 5 times a day are just as American as church bells, as some politicians have recently said. The way to avoid those sorts of things. What's that?
Oh, well, also how that doesn't violate separation of church and state. Separation of church and state, you'll notice, only works for Christians, not for these other groups for some reasons.
But I think the way to control against that is to basically have a limit on immigration in terms of, certainly stop the illegal immigration, but even the legal immigration, curtail it, trim it down, make sure that it's an acceptable rate so that it's not going to change the culture, because we do have a culture that we want to preserve. A uniquely American culture that is made up of many different ethnicities, but we have to slowly integrate new people into it. And we are welcoming of people, especially people from all over the world that have a similar mindset. But we're not just an idea. We're not just sort of a mindset like if you're a freedom-loving person, then you're an American. You're just as American as us. No, there is a blood component to it. But we are also more accepting of other nationalities than some countries, like some of the Scandinavian countries that are just completely, ethnically monolithic. So you gotta, I think that different countries will have different, they will emphasize different parts of that formula. And I think that's okay. But I do think that there are, certainly parts of all of that.
I
that go
think
into
what is quite funny there when you talk about assimilation, even ethnicities that you would think are very similar, like in America, took decades, centuries to actually assimilate. When we talk about like Italians and
Irish,
Irish and some of these
yeah.
other people, like quite literally gangs were formed, you know, I mean, they migrated to different areas, Germans, Irish, Italians, there's almost like centers of where they kind of emigrated to and whatnot. You know, Scottish people to a lesser extent, English, French, all that sort of stuff. So I think even for people that you would think are very similar, it can take hundreds of years for them to assimilate. And then you take somebody who's, you know, spin the map and put your finger on it. From there, it's like, okay, you have 2 weeks to assimilate. It's like, not gonna work, not gonna happen.
All right, so Full Metal Jacket did reply and clarify what he was saying. So James thinks that everything church-wise can perpetually be revisited, or should I say, revised based on individual reason. That's everyone being not just his own pope, but functionally his own God. Fair criticism if you require of your worldview existential certitude in a way that is godlike, right? If you believe that you can be certain of the elements of your church that are infallibly proclaimed, and I mean, I don't know how you can be certain apart from just having faith in those proclamations, which, I certainly, I would assent to that same kind of epistemology where I have faith in certain things as being infallible, namely Scripture. You're just willing to extend it to other things. But if you require epistemic certitude, which again, I'm not sure how you get that apart from just simply having faith in these things, which isn't really epistemic certitude because you still just requires faith. But if you require that kind of thinking, then ultimately, yes, any view that starts to break down some of those things that you're relying on will start to make the individual seem like God. But if you're like me and you're willing to say, I don't know, but I assent to these certain things on basis of faith, then I'm certainly not making myself into a God. I am saying that there is a God, there is objective truth. I just don't happen to know it perfectly, but I am willing to accept on faith those things that seem to be the best, the closest to that objective truth that I know is out there. I mean, it is, by definition, objective means it's outside of me, and so I can only attempt to approach it rationally. So ultimately, I think that this statement is probably fair or close to being fair. The question is, how does anyone avoid this really? You just, either you do it yourself and you pick things rationally, or you just cede that responsibility to someone else.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, it comes down to normative authority, right? So if you don't believe in a normative authority outside of your personal interpretation of Scripture, right? So Orthodox has the Church, Catholics have the Pope and the Magisterium, right? Whereas if you are outside of that, you are essentially, you have to, based on your own rationality, pick and choose what you believe. Now, I think, James, in your worldview, you are okay with being wrong. You've accepted the possibility that you are wrong about certain things. You can be wrong about certain things, right? So you don't have that certitude. Whereas,
which
like
would be required.
Catholic,
the opposite would be required. If I said that everything that I said is absolutely true, that would be functionally making myself God. But because I'm willing to say that no, I might be wrong, then that removes. I think that makes the last part of this comment not a fair critique of my position.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Dub Wild's trying to critique as well. Says panel still cherry picking what brand uses they like. I mean, we all have different beliefs. Some of us are closer than others, but yeah, I mean that's what makes a more interesting panel, I think, rather than if all of us just
it'd be boring if we just all agreed. That'd be kind of lame.
Said the exact same thing. But yeah, no, I think even if you are a Catholic or an Orthodox, even if you're saying, well, I don't have all the answers, you are saying this other thing does, right? And then you have faith in that thing to be well and true, right? And like that's one thing when it comes to Catholicism for me is I look at it and I'm like, well, can I trust the Pope and the Magisterium 100%? And I'm like, well, it doesn't seem to, from my outside perspective, right, that I would want to have them as my normative authority, right? That's the difficult part for me.
It's an interesting comment as well. So talking about Mere Christendom versus Steve Wolf's perspective. I haven't read his book, but I am somewhat, well, really, I'm just familiar with him as a more extreme version of Christian nationalism than Doug Wilson. And just based on this comment and what little I know about him, basically, Samuel Rutherford was an important minister in, I believe he was a contemporary of the the writers of the Westminster Confession. I don't think that he was one of them, but he was consulted on that. I think I have that timeline correct. But either way, I think basically this version of Christendom was tried in most recently the Puritan culture. The Puritans were direct descendants of the Westminster theologians. They were very much pulling from that state type of theology and even that type of church polity and government polity. And I think that the Puritans made some serious mistakes. And, it's just a difference in perspective. But I think that there are brands of Christian nationalism that basically look to the Puritans as being completely right on everything and want to go back to a type of Puritan society. And I think the Puritans get maligned falsely and unfairly in history all the time. But I do think that they made some serious mistakes in terms of how they tried to apply their doctrine to specifically to governance of larger areas.
I just want to back it up a little bit. I know you guys always kind of bag on the infallibility of the Pope, but kind of a loaded question. But do you guys know how many times the Pope has spoken infallibly?
So
depends on which Catholic you ask.
Yeah, I was about to say some Catholics would say two, right? That there are two ex cathedra statements. One being the Ascension of Mary and
the Immaculate Conception and the
Yeah, okay, yeah, so they're both Mariologies. But
yes,
certain Catholics would say a lot more.
Okay.
So which Catholic is infallibly correct about which statements are infallible is then the question, right? I'm not sure what the Vatican itself has said about it, but I think it's two would probably be the most common answer.
Sure.
Well, I mean, you're almost applying a Protestant notion to a Catholic question, right? It's like, I think every Catholic believes that the Pope has said more infallible statements, right? Anytime the Pope says the Nicene Creed, he's saying an infallible statement.
Sure.
The question is, which uniquely papal statements on no authority but the Pope? Well, even that's not quite a fair phrasing of it. But so which uniquely papal statements can we know are infallibly declared, right? There could be other statements that were infallible or were even maybe uttered in an infallible fashion, but we just don't know about them, or there's some doubt, and therefore we can't rely on those. I mean, that's kind of the Protestant principle of like, these things could be valid, but since we don't know, we can't rely on them. And the Protestant idea is you just sort of whittle away at all these things that we can't be sure about, and ultimately you get to this one thing that everyone agrees on is these 66 books, right? It's not even the complete canon that, it's not the Orthodox canon, it's not the extended edition, the Catholic canon.
But
it's
there's no stopping
edition.
But there's no stopping at that whittling away to me.
I think that's perhaps a fair critique.
Yeah.
Because there is a stopping point, right? I mean, it is those 66 books, and you get there because that's, I mean, the reason why you have 66 as opposed to 73 or whatever is because the Jews didn't really accept the Apocrypha, and so this is the core of all of Christianity, and that is supposed to be where we stop. But in theory, you're right. Like, we could reject Jude because not enough apostolic fathers reference it, or and some Christians have tried to do these things, and so yeah, I think in principle you are correct that is one of the biggest flaws, and that's why I think that Scripture and your presuppositions about which Scripture to accept has to basically be a first principle in Protestant theology, and it is for me. I mean, Scripture and God are my most basic beliefs, and I work up from there.
But I think what Full Metal Jacket was getting at is that when you solely rely on Scripture and your interpretation of Scripture, it just leads to so many things. And
right, so that's where I would kind of hybridize myself in there. Is I think that you can't separate the Bible from tradition, at least in some way, shape, or form, right? because if you separate it from the apostolic fathers, if you separate it from the early church or even the first millennium, and then you reinterpret it in 1864 to say, well, actually, we believe in dispensationalism or whatever it might be, right? I think while you have the Bible, right, your interpretation is so far off from what it was. It's like it's a completely different thing, right?
Right.
So I personally, as somebody who was raised Protestant, I would much rather have a heavier emphasis on tradition and to have that foundation, because one of the problems I have in Protestantism and why I think that it necessarily leads to what we have right now in modern day, evangelics or megachurches or whatever, is because it is so divorced from the history of the church in a way that you can interpret it individually or even as a group in any way that you see fit.
Yeah. And to be fair, James, I'm not looking for like a gotcha, dude. I'm just
fight.
Totally yeah.
Well, and I mean, which is why, I mean, while I think most of us agree that the Catholic Church created Protestants, like it was due to abuses, it was due to different things happening in the Middle Ages, and if those things were fixed and not there, we likely would all still be Protestant or still Catholic in some way, shape, or form. Even if there was a later split, I think we'd be much closer to that.
I don't deny that in any shape or form, and I still think there's bad things going on within the church today. Yeah.
But and to John's point, I mean, so for those who aren't familiar with my epistemology, when I say that the Bible and God are my core, my most basic beliefs, right? The foundation of all of my logical chains built on top of those. That doesn't mean that there's nothing that goes into those core beliefs, right? I believe in induction as opposed to deduction, right? I deductively build on those two things, but inductively I can still support those things, right? Evidence pours into those as why I should accept those, and so that's where the tradition comes into place. And that's, I mean, to pick those 66 books devoid of historical context would make absolutely no sense, right? The only way to get to those 66 books in an all coherent fashion is to understand the history of the canon and scripture, and to understand even the history of the Reformation, and all the way up to the point of kind of the Protestant canon. If you were to not factor this in, then you'd end up being like Jehovah's Witness, where they believe in those 66 books, but they don't really have any other historical mooring, and it just makes no sense.
Yeah,
let's reel it back in a bit and get into the video.
Yeah,
if you guys agree.
No, I mean, I love these questions.
Oh,
right?
no, I do too.
Because I think that especially anytime we're talking about a Protestant, and like, I think it comes into play when we talk about Christian nationalism as well, because I mean,
how are we going to make it work?
Within the first millennium, there were absolutely Christian nations and empires, right? Some of the most successful ones of all time, right? So I think that it just has to come into play.
Agree.
The question is how far those laws go.
Yeah,
right. I mean, they're sort of.
It's by what standard?
Well, it's by what standard, but also how far, right? So I've read a lot of your work. I've followed your public ministry, and it seems to me, you can take this as a critique or not, but it seems like you move back and forth between a couple of different modes of engagement on politics. In one mode, you make arguments that are, I think, pretty much in alignment with a kind of mainstream religious conservatism, which basically say that the United States, for most of its history, did not have an established church, but had a kind of soft cultural consensus.
That's not true. All of the 12 out of the 13 colonies had state churches. Even if there wasn't a quote unquote federal church, almost all of the original states had some sort of state church. So, I mean, even though there's like separation of church and state, if you go back to the earliest days, if you go back to the tradition of the United States, there were state churches. So I don't know if that's accurate.
No, I think that's fair. It is a little known part of American history is how incredibly quickly Christianity fell off. So two things, right? One is you're right. the colonies were incredibly Christian by the time of the Revolution because they'd just gone through the first Great Awakening.
Well,
right?
most of them were over there because they were Protestant, right? That's why America has this.
That's
Protestant
true,
kind
but
of
then
movement.
there was a falling off before that because you needed the Great Awakening in the early 1700s, I think. And so George Whitefield in many ways is the forgotten founding father. I mean, he is one of the founding fathers because his influence, and along with Jonathan Edwards and the other awakening.
I want to go back to your point, John. So the Protestants fled England. That's what you're saying. Like they went to America to flee England.
In not necessarily all of them, but yeah, some of them did for sure.
So they were fleeing. Protestants were fleeing a
Protestant
church. Yeah.
Well, kind of, but the Church of England wasn't a fan of everybody else going on, right? So, I mean, they would call themselves. Did they call themselves Anglican Catholics at the time?
Think so.
Even though they're still technically Protestants, right? But it was against the Church of England.
Yeah, it is funny because the term Puritan refers to purifying the Anglican Church. A lot of people don't know that. And as opposed to separatists who wanted to break from the church. But of course, the Puritans that we now think of are the Puritans who did break from the Anglican Church and came over to the U.S. So they were technically separatists, but we call them Puritans. So funny nomenclature there.
Well, I didn't say they were fleeing Catholicism, but I mean, Protestants hate Protestants too. Don't worry about it.
But to finish the context real quick, so we have a lot of religious refugees coming to the U.S. And then Christianity starts to wane. You have the first Great Awakening. It was needed. You had a lot of people basically just having sort of a dead faith. Great Awakening happens. You have a really fervent faith. That actually helps spur the fervor and the red-bloodedness in that precipitates the American Revolution. And then you have the falling off within about 10, 15 years of the original revolution. You have church membership down to like, I don't know, 10% of the population. Like at the turn of the century, the middle of the early 1800s. Yeah, I mean, I don't know exactly how. I've heard the stat. I'd be curious to look into exactly how they did church membership.
Shadowforce says, was it like going back from 80? Like we had a falling off. Was it like a 80% to 90%, or was it like a 10% back to 50%, or how direct? Because I mean, back in the day, you could say, "Oh, the church is falling off. We're only at 50% membership." Whereas now it would be like, "Oh, thank you."
It is based on church membership. I'd be curious to look more into the stats, exactly how they were compiled or what type of polling was done then. But from what I have heard, at the turn of the century, you had a major reduction in church membership, right? Which you can never look into people's souls, but that's a good indication roughly of how Christian a population is. And so you have really close to on the heels of the revolution, you have this kind of deist takeover, which isn't quite secular, but it basically is this falling off of Christianity is in it's waning. And then eventually you do have the Second Great Awakening, but the Second Great Awakening comes with a lot of other problems, and you starts leading into more dispensational type theology, and a lot of the non-denominational issues that you get today are very much tied to the Second Great Awakening. But yeah, so basically, I guess my point is, it's not like at the time of the Revolution, yes, very Christian, but it is a complex history. Like the popularity of Christianity in the nation does kind of ebb and flow, and there definitely was a deist heyday right after the Reformation, which makes sense. I mean, that mindset was sweeping the world, and the French Revolution was happening around that time as well, and that was very much secular, and was popular even in the U.S., certainly amongst some people. So it is complex.
I'll be right back.
Yeah, separatists mentioned. Glory to Count Dooku. I agree. Yes. Hashtag the separatists did nothing wrong. Okay, Dub White. I don't even know what this is. What is?
Yeah,
I've heard this.
I have no idea
what is Depeche mode? I've heard Depeche mode. I've heard this before. I don't know what it is though.
Yeah. Clarify the question, and I can give you 500 words. I can give you 500 words of anything. If the comment was purely to make fun of my loquaciousness,
with
well,
enough
point well
alcohol,
taken.
believe me, he'll say whatever you want him to say with enough alcohol. Okay. All right.
Christianity, originally Protestant Christianity,
A soft establishment.
a soft establishment, and that this broke down in the 1950s and 1960s. There were Supreme Court rulings outlawing school prayer, these kinds of things. And this then led to...
The 1960s, probably the worst decade in American history.
It's a rough time.
You know, it's funny, 1860s and 1960s, now that I think about it.
Rough years, both.
Things like
Just
Roe
wait till
versus Wade, that legalized abortion. And therefore, the goal of religious conservatives should be to do things like overturn Roe, potentially ban abortion, allow for creches on town greens, prayer in some public schools, these kinds of things. Now, these are obviously views that many people disagree with. Some people would call theocratic, but I would say those are views that are sort of, within the mainstream of American politics.
That's true.
But then there is another mode, right, where, that is the mode of basically saying, well, we need to go a bit further, right? And it wasn't actually enough for the United States to allow prayer in public schools. It would have been better if the government of the United States had acknowledged Jesus as Lord. Right? And it's not enough not to have same-sex marriage. We should return to laws against sodomy in all 50 states. And there you are getting towards a view of politics, which I think is closer to something called theocracy. But the degree seems to me to make a great difference, right? There is a substantial difference between saying there are certain things that Christians are against that the law should ban, and saying, actually, no, there are many more things that the law should ban, lest we offend God. And to operationalize that, we need to enforce the Ten Commandments through.
So I think this is kind of like a reverse slippery slope, where they're like, look how bad things have gotten, but if you got into power, you would slowly start undoing all of those things, wouldn't you? Right? It's like,
don't threaten me with a good time.
Kind of, yeah. But it's like, listen, we've what's the meme? 1.3 billion babies aborted since 1960 or something like that. But yeah, I think honestly, just be like, no, we just enforce the laws that are in the books, and we just, we repeal Roe v. Wade. Oh wait, that's already done. We say abortion is murder. Murder's not allowed in this country. It's like, that's pretty simple. And then the rest will just, will fall into place. Because that's the thing that they usually try and do. So they're like, oh, you're gonna like hang gay people. It's like they do the reverse slippery slope. It's like, if we have a Christian system, eventually, someday, we'll become like this far off thing, dystopian hellhole, whatnot, while they import Muslims to create Sharia law, which will actually do all of those things, which, I feel like it's reverse slippery slope, but it's also like pearl clutching, I suppose, at some sort of future event, something. I'm sure there's a fallacy that is called. Jay Dyer would know what fallacies that's called, but there's something to that.
No, I've never heard the term reverse slippery slope, but I like it.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Well, it's like you'll undo all of the degeneracy.
You'll make everything better.
Through the law. Do you think we should enforce all 10 commandments through public law in the U.S.?
Yes, we should respect all 10 commandments.
Okay. Then what about the crimes themselves? What does it mean to for a society to respect the 10 commandments in law? You've already said that you would restore sodomy laws. Would you have laws against adultery and fornication?
Yes.
And so an adulterer would have to pay a fine, be publicly flogged?
Well, no, what I would do, and basically...
This is unfortunate news for the current president of the United States.
Yes.
It's worth noting.
Well, and for King David, actually.
Yep. True enough.
I gotta back up. I want a screen cap of that. It's this really kind of smug looking, like, down the eyes at your opponent, like, the president of the United States was an adulterer and you voted for him, didn't you? It's like, yeah. Now, I mean, I don't even know, like this is probably a good something for us to discuss, but do you think that we should be legally enforcing or socially enforcing? Because I tend to think that a strong Christian culture will simply shame people into not doing these things, right? Rather than actually having to like physically enforce them with force, right? Force of the law for a lot of these things. I think if we simply shamed and berated people.
So you're
for
just
doing
saying
evil things.
Bring back slut shaming. Yeah, I agree, 100%.
I mean, yeah. Like
Yeah.
if we as a society we should outlaw pride parades for various reasons because there's pedophiles dancing in front of children and whatnot and exposing themselves to children. Actually, on that note, there was 15 representatives somewhere voted against a felony flashing of children, flashing of minors because it would affect transgender individuals at pride shows.
It would, wouldn't it?
And I'm like, say that
show
again,
your
but
hand
slower.
Yeah.
Say it again, but slower. It's like we must protect the trannies showing themselves to minors. We can't make that a felony because of how it would affect the gay population. It's like But yeah, I think social shame is a effective tool before we need to go to like legal recourse. And again, I mean, I think we should just enforce the laws on the books. If you're naked around a minor, you get thrown in prison forever, right? You know, it's simple little things like that.
Well, I mean, when it comes to theonomy, right? How much of the Old Testament law should we apply today? That's the question of theonomy. I think the Westminster Confession had it right, where there are basically 3 categories of Old Testament law. There's the moral law, which is never abrogated. There is the ritual law. I'm blanking on the other term for it, but the ceremonial law, that's the term, which pretty much is abrogated. I mean, Christ fulfilled it, so it's not abolished, but it's fulfilled. We no longer need to do that. We no longer need to sacrifice animals and whatnot.
Goats and pigeons and stuff like that.
And then there's the third category, which is the one that requires the most nuance in terms of how you actually apply it. But it's the judicial law, which there are plenty of laws that are judicial in nature, right? Meaning they're very context based. And you apply those, the Westminster Confession uses the phrase, according to the general equity thereof. And so you try to perceive the principles, you take those out of the text, and then you apply those to your situation, recognizing that they were based in context at the time. So now you take your current context and you apply them. And I think that is a pretty good model for how we should apply theonomy today. Although, that applies to how you that's more a question of how you handle what is sin and what is not. Like that's the law, the use of the word law that I'm using in that context, right? In the context of like law and gospel. It's a different question when you then try to apply that version of the law to the laws of a nation, and that's when you get more into how much of sin do you allow, right? Something is against God's law, but should you make it against the nation's law? He gets into it more in this interview, so I kind of want to wait for that conversation.
So one of the things that is important to note here is the nature of the value of prudence and wise judgment as you seek to implement. You don't find the magic breaker and flip a switch and all of a sudden, ta-da, Christian Republic.
Right.
It just doesn't happen that way. So what I would do on adultery is I would get rid of no-fault divorce. That'd be the legal reform I would institute. So no-fault divorce has been a disaster, and I think was upstream from the sexual revolution. But there are many things that we could do that would simply go upstream and deal with sort of root issues.
Right.
So,
But that works because
and I mean, I think a lot of these laws or these changes that people want to implement, people like me, is it just increases personal accountability. Right? It's like no abortion. Well, if you're not having sex with people you don't want to have children with, that doesn't affect you, right?
It gets rid of the incentivization to do bad things. So
correct. Yeah. It's like no fault divorce. It's like be careful with whom you marry, right? Or don't. Oh, the spark is gone. I'm gone now. It's like I think just more personal accountability. A lot of these things just kind of incentivize people to actually be careful with what they do. Maybe
higher
November
moral
1st,
standards, crazy.
Maybe November 1st will incentivize a lot of people to get jobs. You never know. Maybe these systems actually just hold people back. I'm just saying.
dub wide since you're making fun of me, which is totally fine. I encourage it, but they have to be fair criticisms. And this stream, I have not ashed my pants. I've done that many other streams, but up to this
don't brush
point,
it. You blow it off.
I have not yet dropped ash in my pants. So if you're gonna criticize me, which again I encourage, it just has to be a fair criticism.
A married couple has shared assets, and you can, require payments of alimony and these kind of things. What about fornication, or as the kids call it, premarital sex? Right? You have two college students who commit the sin of fornication. You're not going to have one, pay alimony to the other. What does the law do about that?
Actually, earlier when you asked me adultery and fornication, what I wanted to do is split the two, because adultery, they're not in,
adultery is worse than fornication.
Adultery is far, far worse than fornication. And in the Mosaic law, there wasn't.
I know many people who will be relieved to hear that as well.
So, and our goal is to relieve them, right?
That's right.
So in Mosaic law, there is no express penalty for fornication. Okay? There is a penalty for marital fraud. So if a woman represents herself as a virgin and she's not a virgin, then there was civil consequences. But that had to do with things like inheritance and who the father of the baby was, and all of that.
So we're going easy on fornication.
Well, we're following the Bible,
right?
Okay. So
I think you got to be careful here, because I've made this point before in a stream, but the minor prophets actually start to see a transition in terms of how God talks about adultery law, whereas the charge he brings against Israel as being an adulterer is not on the grounds of violating property rights or inheritance rights or any of that. It's on the grounds of violating the love that a husband and wife should have, right? They've broken faith with the love that they're supposed to share. And that's a transition you see from Old Testament to New Testament right there in the Minor Prophets, where you've got, before you sort of had marriage talked about in more legal property terms, and even the adultery laws being more focused around inheritance and things like that. And like, breaking trust in that sense. But then you start to see a transition, and even in the way that Christ talks about marriage, it's much more towards a modern view of marriage. So I think as you start to apply the general equity of these specific, laws against fornication, you might want to take that into account. So I don't think that you can, use the Mosaic law as a way to be lenient on fornicators simply because they were a little bit more lenient back in the day. I mean, even Christ talks about how Mosaic law was a little bit easier on things like divorce and stuff, which we should actually be more strict on. So
yeah, and I mean that's the difficult area where I think it's again, if we just have a Christian society and a certain level of shame towards these actions, right? Consequences for your actions socially, I don't think you need to litigate them for the most part.
A question for you guys: does it work both ways for men as well?
What do you mean? Oh yeah, I mean in terms of fornication and adultery.
Yeah. No, I mean just like as far as the shaming goes. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean
it should, right? Okay. So like if me and you are buddies and you're bragging to me about you shagged 3 women this weekend and you're professing to be Christian, I'd be like, both in name and in spirituality, I'd be like, really?
Yeah.
You think that's good, or we have that
in terms
discussion,
of
right?
The sin conversation, certainly equal. In terms of the
well, social.
Let's just say there are other factors that go into the social conversation.
Calling a dude a slut in public is different than calling a woman a slut in public. So.
And there are good reasons for that are not entirely nonsensical.
Well, I think women are the gatekeepers of sex.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's like an achievement for men, kind of biologically, right?
Socially, yeah. Biologically, socially, yeah.
But I would treat them the same.
Okay.
As far as shame goes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Be degen, get bully. How about that?
Fair enough.
So what I want to do is I want to be a biblical.
But we're not.
Oh, sorry. I thought that was James.
Completely. I mean, at least in the discussion we just had, you did not advocate stoning adulterers, right?
No,
so there is So there is you're deciding which particular aspects of the Bible should apply.
Well, yeah.
Right. There are biblical precepts that allow for the stoning of adulterers in the Old Testament.
Right. Correct.
And you're not in favor of stoning adulterers.
Well, I'm not against it either.
You're open to it.
No.
All right, pause.
This is the thing.
Time for the tough questions. John, are you okay with stoning of adulterers?
No, not really.
Yeah, I'm
not in modern times. I mean, it's one of those things where I think that there should actually be like really heavy penalties, adultery in marriage, right? So let's say if there's an adultery in marriage, maybe instead of a 50-50 split divorce, 75-25 or something like that. But I think that it's one of those things where while the effect is great, it's not the same as murder or something like that, where there is a permanent loss of life that needs to be justified in some way, like where justice needs to be applied. But I think in a Christian society, we should also be a very merciful society. So no, I don't think that is the proper way to go about it.
There's an interesting take from I saw that. That's great.
Yeah, that's my cuck's position. No stoning. No stoning. That's my cuck position over here. I'm sorry, I'm so lenient.
There's an interesting take from Dennis Prager, I believe, where he talks about how stoning was perhaps in many ways, this requirement of stoning the adulterous woman would have been a law that actually, in effect, protected women more than they would have otherwise been protected, because it basically required the whole community to take part in the execution. And so, it would be very hard to get that many people on board with it if it wasn't legit or something along those lines. I don't know if I really buy that. It sounds a little bit like Cope, but I just thought that was an interesting perspective.
Politics is the art of the possible. So, all right. So one of the things that people do is they, and this is what the nice lady from CNN did with asking me about women voting.
We're going to get to some of those questions in a moment. But go on. Yeah.
But that's way down the road. I've got bigger fish to fry than things like that. So if you ask me for my ideal theocratic republic, I would say I'm willing to tell you how I envision this, but I do it remembering our discussion starting with depravity, where I believe that people who think they're doing the will of God need to check themselves, and ideologues who build utopias are a great manufacturer of hellholes. I don't want that. I want us to grow into it the way Alfred did. So what King Alfred brought the laws of Deuteronomy, made them the laws of England, and that was the basis of common law. So he didn't just bring the content of Mosaic law over, he brought the system of precedent and case law. And what I would much prefer to see an Alfred approach, where you take the principles of the law, you apply them, you stand by the principles, and then using Christian prudence and wisdom, you push in that direction until you get the results that you want. You get to the point where there aren't any pride parades and there aren't any drag queen story hours. Okay, good. What our society needs to do is say, this is normal sexuality. This is wholesome. This is what we encourage.
Right.
We formally disapprove of these activities, and you have laws that would enable you to close down the bathhouses. But that's the kind of thing that
how does that then apply to questions of religious practice? Because they're too. So you've said and argued, I think, that you think that the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution would allow for the U.S. Congress to make a generic profession of Christian belief. It just wouldn't allow for them to establish a Reformed Christianity or Catholic Christianity as the established church of the U.S. Okay,
right.
So you're in a world where Congress has made that kind of.
I just noticed from this perspective, does he ever actually look someone in the eye, or is he one of those people that like looks like underneath or whatnot when he's talking? Not that I naturally distrust those people more, but I'm just saying.
Profession, they've said Christ is king. The 10 Commandments are up in courthouses, but you still have obviously a range of Christian belief.
Right.
You have plenty of non-Christian belief. You have Jewish belief. You have Muslim belief. You have Hindu belief. You have Buddhist belief. And then you have non-belief, right? And out of these categories, some of them certainly, from your perspective, fall afoul of some of the first few commandments in the 10 Commandments.
Yeah.
Right?
So
how does the law of a moderate Christian theocracy approach non-Christians?
This is a horse and cart thing, okay? Because there's no way that we're going to get a Christian republic and Congress affirming the 10 Commandments and and confessing that it is the Senate and House released a statement saying we believe Jesus rose from the dead, and the president signed it. There's no way we're going to get to that.
I'm sorry, Sea Runner. I mean,
You know what? Yeah,
I
go
have
ahead.
a funny story about this. So I was being interviewed for a job when I was like 18 years old, right? So I'm like this young guy applying for like what was the position? Like a store manager, like an assistant store manager, basically, right? And the female who was doing the hiring, who was the store manager, could not look me in the eye. And I was like, you're the boss. Like, you're like the least imposing force in this room. And I'm like applying to be your underling. Like,
Right.
I don't know. This feels wrong. And I've had bosses that were, normal, straightforward, very masculine in that way. But sometimes it's like, how did you get this job?
Yeah. I mean, I have a lot of sympathy for people that have trouble looking people in the eye. I mean, I've gone through I've gone through waves of my own sort of ability to interact with people on that level well. Like when I was in college, I worked in the service industry for years and got really good at just those personal interactions. And then I went and worked as a tech consultant. And while that was mostly in person pre-COVID, that was great. But then when everything went to basically virtual work nearly 100% of the time with occasional kind of trips to visit the client, I noticed a falling off in my own social skills where I'm like, now all of a sudden, for no reason that I could have otherwise identified, I'm having a hard time looking people in the eye. It's like just the screens all the time make me lose practice.
That's an interesting topic of kids who went through COVID and outs like who were about to graduate or whatever it might be. And instead of spending time physically with people, they were like essentially locked in a room for years.
Right.
I think that it totally stunts people.
My point is many such cases, and don't get discouraged. And actually, there are ways to rehabilitate yourself.
No, Farrell, that's funny. Like you get uncomfortable when you're not looking at a screen.
Right. So for me, I mean, I've recently started to get back into more of that service side of things, where I'm trying to actually engage with people and on a just many increasing the volume of customer and client interactions can actually help a lot when you're just engaging with a ton of different people all at once. You start to learn to just step outside of your shell. So there are ways to figure it out, but I'm very sympathetic to people that have that issue, because I can't deal for long periods of time with just this virtual stuff. It killed me back then, and it still is just unworkable today. And so I've realized that no, I have to do work that's person to person.
You have to force yourself to do it. Yeah. Andy says, ruined my 2 teen boys' brains. I'm really sorry to hear that, man.
Yeah.
I remember when it was going on, my brother-in-law was graduating high school, and they drove a van up with 2 of the teachers, and they stood like 10 feet away, popped confetti, and left. And that was his graduation ceremony.
Yeah, an entire generation was robbed of life events.
Yeah.
And, it's sad.
And it's just nonsense. I remember I would be with one of the only people not wearing a mask anywhere for any reason.
Dude, I would do that in California, and people would just look at me like I was wearing a swastika, dude. It was crazy.
Yeah, like I was selling a car at a car dealership, and my dad was like, "Oh, you're gonna go in there without a mask?" And I was like, "They want my money. Like they don't care. They don't care. They're not gonna tell me to leave." Everybody was looking at me funny, but they were still making me sign papers, so they did not care.
Yep.
What are you gonna do? Tell me no?
Yeah. Yeah. We don't want your money, sir. Get out of here.
Yeah, it's like, good luck.
That end result, without a massive reformation and revival among the people already.
Right.
So if I just tried to superimpose that Christian theocracy on the United States as it is now, then I've got a monster problem in Dearborn, Michigan, with all the Muslims. I've got a monster problem there, and it would be a problem that I could not solve, because you can't jam these things down in a top-down way. It's got to be church planting, evangelism, persuasion, and when you,
so you've done all that.
Yeah.
And 87% of the United States are solid, Westminster Confession Calvinists. 87%.
Just imagine how wonderful that would be.
You've done it, right? But there is still that unregenerate 13% of the United States,
right,
some of whom, are papists, Catholics, and a lot of whom are atheists, Muslims, Jews, Hindus, and so on, right? And all along the way through this process of conversion, it seems perfectly reasonable for people who hold those beliefs to look at what's going on and say to you, once we hit 87%, what happens to my liberties? Yes.
So I would say,
I think this is another one of those really false dichotomies, because if those people reached 87%, they would not be concerned with your freedoms, your religious liberties, or whatnot. So this is like where, listen, again, if the levers of powers must be held by someone, it must be us. That's my take on it. And even if you try and say, well, the Christians will just be infighting again. And I'm like, yes, I long for the days where Christians are infighting about how to worship the one true God the best, okay? Because I think that is actually
the religious wars.
I think that is actually a moral pursuit, right? It's like we believe that if you want to, a battle of the fittest, if you will, right? Let God decide the victor about how to worship God the best. I think that's like an ideal scenario, okay? Okay?
Sounds a lot better than what's going on right now. So
yeah, it's like, okay, we can fight Muslims or we can try to worship God the best way, right?
I don't know.
What do you want?
I'm looking at that one through my scope, I kind of prefer that it be a degenerate than another Christian.
Well, you're getting that timeline, so don't worry about it, man. We're not getting this Christo-fascist. They're coming for the Jews. They're coming for the Muslims. We're not getting that timeline, James. You have nothing to worry about. It's like pearl clutching for something that literally the opposite is happening.
Right.
Because I'm a Burkean conservative. Right?
I'm skeptical, but go on. Yeah.
Really am. Burkean conservative. That means that you play with the hand that you're dealt. Okay, what are you working with? One of the things that America was founded as a Protestant Christian country. At the founding, we were 98% Protestant every direction. There were a
lot of people who didn't go to church.
Yeah,
a lot of.
I mean, that might be technically correct, but I think North America had some Catholic influence due to the Spaniards before Protestants even. So I think that there
was a very influential founding father who was Catholic as well. Charles Carroll actually kind of was the author for the institution of the Senate. So he had a lot of influence.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think 98% is probably a little bit overblown, but I would still say it's majority Protestant. But I think there was definitely some Catholic.
Oh, for sure.
As well.
Unregenerate.
Most aristocratic part of our democracy came from a Catholic. That sounds about right.
That's funny.
Including some people writing our founding documents, but baptized Protestant, yes.
But the point I was driving to is that there were periods of Reformation, the Great Awakening, and the Second Great Awakening.
Well, I mean, Deb says America was pro and it failed. Well, then you have to use that same logic for Orthodox because Constantinople fell. You have to say, well, Spanish was converted to Islam for 700 years, so the Catholics failed, right? If you take that logic and say, Protestant nation failed. Protestants over. Well, you have to say the same thing about all the Muslims countries that got, recapped or anything, right? So anytime a nation loses, you just blame it on like the one element of that nation. I don't think that's correct. I mean, everything falls to entropy eventually.
Awakening, and there was a great expansion of the church in the 19th century. When it came to America kept her Protestant ethos and incorporated successfully Catholics and Jews. All right, that's something that we know how to do.
Sorry, I got to back that up.
When it came to America kept her Protestant ethos and incorporated successfully Catholics and Jews. All right, that's something that we know how to do.
Don't ask Benjamin Franklin about that.
It's been done, right? And
yeah, define successful. That is interesting to me to say, like, oh, in the 19th century we successfully integrated Catholics and Jews, when, like, if we take the beginning and then our current point and it's in decline, and then you pick this point and say we successfully did something like along the decline. I don't know if that, successfully question mark.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't know. I don't get that. It's like, if we want to live in a Christian nation, is a Christian nation defined by successfully integrating non-Christian people into it? I feel like that's a Vatican II statement. It's like, it's super ecumenist. It's like, oh, we love Jews and Muslims and Hindus, and it's like,
See, John, you don't have to bash on Vatican II except as a talking point against Catholics. Vatican II actually, like, the ecumenist side of Vatican II isn't horrible from a Protestant perspective.
it is for me.
Is it though? Is it though? Because I feel like it's in line with a lot of Protestant principles that you would agree with.
Could you elaborate on some of those?
Well,
because I
mean,
I might be less Protestant than you are. So
yeah. Well, I mean, so I suppose, are you just referring to the Vatican II stuff that starts to be ecumenist towards Muslims and towards non-Christians?
Acceptance of other religions and tolerance of other religions is never advocated in the Bible and explicitly responsible for the fall of Israel over and over and over and over again throughout the Old Testament. So I don't think tolerance of other religions, not individuals within that religion, right? Because I can have conversations with anybody, right? Yeah. But like a state level tolerance of other religions, it's like you have different groups competing for power with limited resources. So everybody is going to be working within that, whether you like it or not. People are tribal, right? And so people are going to be trying to do what's best for their people within the nation, which was what they should do.
I'll start digging.
That's from a Presby, bro. That's your team. That's your guy. Working well, innit?
So I'm grateful for that. So I'm not trying to reinvent anything. I'm trying to say I want to go back to where we were getting a C+. Mm-hmm. We were doing okay.
Right. It wasn't offensive to God that there were these Catholics with their icons and these Jews who didn't acknowledge Jesus' lordship.
There's a difference between a sin and a crime. Okay.
With that I agree.
Okay.
Yes.
And one of the big problems that budding theocrats have had is an inability to distinguish sins and crimes. And that was something that tripped up the Puritan interregnum in England after the English Civil War. And basically someone says, oh, I've got this system of doctrine and everything that's in the Bible that I think that God doesn't like, we have to make a law, right? So I call myself a theocratic libertarian.
You pause for a second.
The theocrat.
I mean, I think this has to be true, but I'm not exactly sure what biblical warrant you get for this. Like, I think emotionally this position seems right, that there is a difference between a sin and a crime. I'm just not exactly sure how you argue that from a position of Scripture.
That's a good question.
Yeah, the only thing I can think of is again that appeal to freedom as being a good, perhaps in and of itself, or at least in the sense that it makes other goods better. I
Well,
can
I mean,
see that, but that's an inference. That's a sort of
yeah.
multiple step argument. That's kind of complex. I don't know exactly how you get sin is different from crime just straight from the text. So I don't know. What do you think?
I think there is logical gray area. Like for instance, if the speed limit is 70 and you hit 71, like is that a crime on a technicality?
I got
Sure.
freedom in
Is
Christ, bitch. I'm driving.
well, right? Is that a sin though? No? Question mark? Not
Right.
Not really. Right? I mean, I think there is a little bit of gray area in there, but yeah, strictly from the text. I don't know of anyone who, at least morally, was punished for a crime that wasn't also considered a sin.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's an example of that you could pull from scripture.
Right. I think
There
this
might be
sweater is
some
Eddie
little
Bauer, by the
gray
way.
zones. There might be some little gray zones somewhere in there.
Yeah. No, again, I think he's right. I think you have to distinguish between sin and crime, and I think that was the problem that the Puritans faced, is they started to conflate the two. But yeah, where you draw the line is tough, and I'm not sure that it's a simple issue when it comes to trying to base that biblically.
That's not right. Stale Dog says, is violating the NFA a sin? Well, I would never post about that publicly, good sir. Never do that. Yeah, I don't know. Now, what do you think about theocratic libertarian? Because that seems like a contradiction in terms. Obviously, I think it just means like a very free society that has its basis in Christian ethics, right?
Yeah.
I think generically, even though the term is somewhat nonsensical.
I'm basically here for it. I think that's. I think it's obviously a provocative term, but that's basically what I want as well. I want a generally Christian nation that does value freedom.
Correct. We would all that society would be infinitely better than whatever we have now.
At the
but
very least, right?
I guess
I think it probably would be better than like a Catholic-run theocracy, papal state society. So yeah, that's kind of what I want.
Well, I don't think the papacy can't do that anymore, right? Because at
they
one
changed
point
their canon law. I mean, they could always change it back.
I don't have the documents in front of me, but I believe there, you go from the what's the Pastor Eternus, Vatican I, but then you have the where they can't have their own states or anything else like that somewhere in there as well. I forget where
They're not allowed to anymore. That's part of Vatican I.
Well, not allowed to be part of any government officially or something like that. The Pope himself. I'd have to read up on that, but I believe there was something to that effect.
It does certainly make their accounting very easy. You guys have heard stories about all the money laundering that takes place through the Vatican because they have no accountability.
Well, wasn't one of the Vatican accountants, I don't know if he was a priest or whatnot, but one of the guys in charge of their finances, like he got kicked out, or he didn't get prosecuted, but he got kicked out of the church for his financial crimes within the church.
Yeah,
something
supposedly
in the last 5 years.
A lot of black ops have been funded via.
Well,
Vatican
if you follow the CIA influence in the Vatican, or even the Rothschild-backed bank that they started, I'm sure that money has gone very, very strange places.
Oh, I'm sure.
Something I want a Bible verse. I want Bible, ideally 10 commandments if we make something against the law.
Right.
But if it has to do with the manufacture and sale of widgets or the thoughts a person thinks or the beliefs that they have, I'm a libertarian.
So you're a libertarian on how people worship, but you're not a libertarian on who they sleep with. Is that that right?
Yes.
But couldn't you argue it in reverse, that maybe...
Okay, I was right. Yeah, Vatican court convicts Cardinal Becciui for 5 years for embezzlement of Vatican funds. So that was a few years ago. But yeah, I remember reading something about that.
God cares more about how you worship than whether you've committed a particular sexual sin?
I do believe that God cares more about how we worship. I do believe that's the first table of the law.
Yeah, it starts
more
with that.
important.
It ends with adultery, but it starts with worship.
But the fact that God cares more about that does not mean that we are competent to deal with all the ins and outs of it. So, for example, Paul says that greed is idolatry, but I don't want covetousness police. I don't want, there's certain things that the civil magistrate cannot do.
Why is it easier for the
That is
civil
where
magistrate?
the libertarian comes in, right? That's where the libertarian mindset comes into play. It's that it's easier to govern the outward actions than the inward heart. And so we don't want the government trying to dictate what thoughts you can have and what personal beliefs you can have. And this is sort of a Vatican II spirit, but rather it is the domain of the government to govern how you interact in your society. And so even though it is more important what you do in your heart, it's perhaps not the government's place. I think that's fair.
Right. And I mean, I think it also just comes down to a matter of practicality of policing someone's thoughts versus policing like the external outcomes. Right. One of those things is actually easy for a society to do or a civil system to do. The other one is basically like, impossible, or you end up like the UK right now.
Right. Yeah. And in the aggregate, you kind of end up approximating the same thing, right? You know a tree by its fruits. And so if you do govern the outward actions, you do shape the culture, and you do shape the way people think, right? The law is a teacher. And it has a serious effect, right? This is one of the biggest things that the libertarians get wrong when it comes to like pot smoking and adult or prostitution, right? They say that, if you just outlaw them, then they'll still continue in the exact same proportions, but they'll just be, we won't get any tax money from it or whatever. But that's not true, right? If you outlaw something, it actually does go down in numbers. And if that's a bad thing that you're reducing, which with pot, I guess you can argue, although I would argue that it is a better society that does not have a pervasive pot smoking culture than one that does. But certainly with prostitution, right, it is a better society that does not have a bunch of prostitution than one that does. If you're reducing that bad thing, then you end up with a better society. So the teaching element of the law is not something to be overlooked, and I think the libertarians often do overlook it, or if just completely deny it.
Yeah, and I mean, I think a lot of these things are kind of symptoms of root problems, and so I think a lot of these things get canceled out by having a Christian nation, right? By having these stigmas and social shames against these things, and then for more serious problems, you can have actual legal consequences.
Right.
Straight to arrest people for sexual crimes than it would be for them to arrest them for other sins, just because it's a more concrete act.
The jealous wife has evidence.
I'm curious because it seems to me that someone who wanted to, let's say, do a skeptical read of your view would be that in the current climate, you feel like you have an affinity for Catholics like me, and even some affinity for monotheists who don't accept the gospel,
right?
And you want us to like you and feel like we're on the same team, and you don't feel that way about, let's say, feminists, gay people, and so you'll say, well, of course, in the theocratic republic, we'll leave the Catholics alone, but we'll arrest some people committing sodomy. But in your heart, you might want to arrest the Catholics too.
No.
Okay. I'm just raising that possibility.
All right. So let me. This is something that Switzerland did. Okay, and this maybe illustrate what you're getting at here. In my biblical republic, if Muslims were here, not citizens but residents, they were traveling merchants and whatever, and you had a number of Muslims in the same town, and they wanted to get together and pray together, would that be a problem? No. Would they be allowed to build a minaret? No. Church bells, yes.
Yep.
Minaret, no.
But synagogues, yes.
Yes, but they're not trying
Why the exception? I'm just curious.
I think I think he gives his reason.
Okay. I want to hear his reason.
To own the public space by by the
I see. Okay. So the emphasis, right.
So
I mean, that's at
basically,
least fair. He's saying that Jews aren't trying to. They're not a very evangelical or evangelizing community, whereas Muslims are inherently a.
Well, and is he making like a
jihadist.
public disturbance type thing where you have to have loudspeakers for prayers 5 times a day, or they're less disruptive? Is that the
I
argument?
think something akin to that. Yeah.
Okay.
society would acknowledge that Jesus rose from the dead. And again, this is down the road. This is my 500 years from now. We'd acknowledge that Jesus is Lord. And we would say this is a Protestant Christian country. And we have successfully worked out how to relate to Catholics and Jews. We have a long history of that. We do not know how to take 3 million Muslims who want to live under Sharia law and put them in the middle of Michigan. We don't have the mechanism or the wisdom.
You think most American Muslims right now want to live under Sharia law?
No, the ones in Dearborn do.
Yeah, I mean, objectively, right? And that's the thing, when we're talking about such large populations, like, how do you police a group of 3 million people that want to live diametrically opposed to you and can vote in their own representatives?
You shouldn't have
can
to.
vote in their own people.
Yeah.
Like, well, that's the thing with democracy. If you just import people who are antithetical to your beliefs, you just get outvoted, right? They just use the levers of power against you, right? And so I think a lot of this is like, oh, well, you would oppress the Muslims. And I think, no, you would not allow any other group to have domination over your country. So like, I want Christianity to be the dominant force within the society.
But this is why the immigration thing is so key. This is why, I mean, it's such a...
It's everything, yeah.
It's
you can
such
argue
an
about
important force in today's
economic,
politics because people feel it and it matters. And if you just slow the rate of immigration, even legal immigration, but certainly illegal immigration, which is the biggest problem today, but then you would mitigate so many of these problems. You wouldn't have just whole populations just transported into the middle of American communities. And
well, that's the thing. Like, if we won every election, every single election went the way that we wanted it to in this group right now for the next 15 years, but immigration didn't stop, it wouldn't matter.
No.
It wouldn't matter because their population would quite literally double in that time frame due to immigration, due to their birth rate difference between ours. They average double, triple, quintuple, our birth rate versus theirs. And so quite literally, they will just replace you at the voting booth, and then you will no longer have a voting booth, right? That's just how it goes. But I think most of us in here kind of think democracy is limited franchise democracy has the best chance of working long term, but I think we kind of see late stage, right? We have been born into the late stage democracy, right? The true end state of a lot of these ideals.
The weak men bringing hard times stage.
Yeah.
Albanocyclosis. Yeah.
Well, and I don't know if the next hard times will create a democracy. You know what I'm saying? I don't think coming out the other side.
It rarely does. The whole point is the weak times bring a strong man. Yeah.
Okay,
and Trump is not that strong.
Table that as a debatable point. I'm going to repeat the question.
I wish Trump was the man they thought he was, but he's not.
No, he's not.
MAGA is basically a left-wing party to me.
Question: do you think most American Muslims right now want to live under Sharia law?
I would say the Muslims who come here to...
I think if you poll Muslims, it's irrelevant, right? Whether or not they explicitly say they want to live under Sharia law, you can just track their voting habits.
Yeah, who cares?
Yeah.
I mean, look, I have no hatred for the Muslim that lives next door or whatever. Like, that's not the point. But yeah, no, I mean, it's their philosophy, their lifestyle, their system of law, right? We were talking about the difference between Roman law and common law. We'll try Sharia law. I mean, talk about a totally different system. I mean, it's just different. And in large enough numbers, that becomes a problem. One-offs aren't necessarily a problem, right? You absolutely love the individual next to you. You can love your Muslim neighbor. But big enough numbers, it becomes an issue.
Well, yeah, 100%. It's like you can argue, you can reason, rationalize with an individual. You can't rationalize or argue with 3 million of them who just don't respect your way of life, and they have no interest in living like you, right? It's like, it's the difference between an individual and a mob.
Assimilate are coming to assimilate to a Christian country. And I have no objection to that.
Aren't they coming to assimilate to a country that has fallen away from Christianity and is engaged in all kinds of public debauchery?
No, we're talking about my ideal republic.
They've right.
All right. So basically, we've painted ourselves into a bad corner. America is a regular country like other countries, and regular countries have borders. And if you assimilate at too rapid a rate, any kind of alien worldview, you're going to have trouble. I believe that Muslims and Hindus could be assimilated in an ideal republic.
This comment is horrible, but it makes me laugh.
Brown people will be removed in the next update.
The
next PvP arena update will remove brown people from the server in Minecraft. It's have you ever seen that meme? And it's this lefty, and he's like, could you imagine what America would look like without the evil of slavery? And then underneath, it's like, this tweet has been deleted. Like, oh wait.
The speed, and that assimilation would be hand in glove with evangelization, and because people would be coming to fit into this Christian society. But if right now they're coming in as in a parasitic way, I believe, to devour a rotting empire, and that's because we don't know who.
Late stage empires, yes, it is always people from outside the empire trying to take over what's left of the corpse, right? As it slowly falls apart. I mean, this happened with the Roman Empire, Byzantium Empire, Holy Roman Empire, like all of the cool ones. This is what happens late stage.
Which is bad for the empire. Some would argue not necessarily bad for society. Like, I don't know. The barbarians taking over Rome didn't do a horrible job. Like, there was some good that came out of that. They were mostly Aryan though, so that was a big issue.
That's right. We got the Aryan takeover of Rome.
It is funny though. Like, so
wait, are you advocating for the Aryan Brotherhood to take over America?
different Aryans. Totally different context. No, but it is a funny little quirk of history where in the like 2nd, 3rd century, you have a bunch of Aryan heretics going out, not knowing that they're heretics, right? They think they're Orthodox because Arianism was big, and so they just go out as missionaries into these barbarian lands, proselytize to them, convert a bunch of them, and then later, basically, Arianism is weeded out in the Christian culture after Nicaea, and you know, it's like we pretty much get rid of it, and all the Orthodox Christians have a hold, and then Rome starts to fall. All these barbarians who are taking over Rome are also Christians, but they're the Aryan brand of Christianity, and of course they see it in their interest to maintain sort of this separation in terms of their own views rather than just totally mixing with the people that they're conquering. And so now you have Arianism creeping back into not just creeping but taking over these now Orthodox Christians. It just kind of is amazing how history works.
Well, and I mean, I think empires are just destined to fall, and I think that's why you see places like the UK are slightly ahead of us, is their empires fell slightly faster. And I think that's what happens, right? You incorporate all of these different ethnic groups, they migrate to the homeland, and then it's corruption from the inside out, basically.
I will say this empire is still pretty new, and I have some faith in the American experiment. I understand things look a little dark right now, but Rome had a lot of issues, and Rome lasted a really long time, and it had issues throughout.
Rome had like a golden era every century, right? And then it would have like 3 emperors in the same year.
Right.
Lots of turnover. Okay, there's lots of turnover in the empire.
So I'm curious to see what happens, but I'm not a doomsdayist in terms of American society. I do think that this empire has many centuries left ahead of it. but we'll see.
Really?
I think so.
All right. All right. Would you like to place bets on that? Are you a betting man?
Very white pill.
It'll be a bet that's like 200 years long, and our children's have to pay it off.
They inherited
be like, boom! I take everything.
We are. We don't know what we stand for. We don't know what we think, and so consequently, you've got that 90-foot tall Hindu statue in Texas.
Right.
Okay. All right. So talking about that, like, isn't that just a perfect picture of Old Testament Israel inviting in these foreign nation who worship demons and then erecting statues and places of worship for their own foreign gods? Like, isn't that just exactly what we're dealing with here?
And Doug says the same thing. But Doug makes an interesting point where you don't really need a law against that, right? If you have a good society, you shouldn't need a law against building 90-foot statues of idols. No, maybe.
Well, if they weren't here in the first place, it's like you don't need a lot of laws when it's a cohesive, right? We don't need to argue against I don't know, Japanese monarchy. We don't need to have laws against that in America if we simply don't have Japanese monarchs in America, right? Yes.
And
that should be illegal in your view.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Well, I think that sort of thing, there shouldn't even have to be a law.
Right.
Right. There was no law. If you go back to 1945 America,
there was no law then against building,
and it was unthinkable then.
Well,
right. So that's my point. There are a number of things.
I think if you look at 19th century American history, honestly, while there were not large numbers of Hindus, I think a lot of very strange religious experiments were quite thinkable, and that America has always had a certain kind of room for whatever the equivalent of building.
Yeah, America's always had room for religious weirdos.
Yes,
and the 19th century
present company, and I include myself in this, very much included.
But the 19th century America was a monkey house of communes and different things. That's all true. But the 90-foot statue, those sorts of things are taunts. It's not, here's our free, we're just trying to worship in our own quiet little way. Is sort of, I wonder how far we can push this before somebody says something.
Okay, so there's a no taunting the Christian majority.
Right.
Soft policy. Let's talk about women for a moment.
Yes.
I've been pressing you on what
Here
would
we
be
go.
forbidden.
Women, let's go.
Both on a shorter timeline and in the 500-year path to the Calvinist
Pause
Republic.
it for a second.
Let's talk.
Again, to put this in context, this conversation, I mean, I understand this comment is facetious, but this is a conversation between a normie on the right-hand side and a somewhat normie Christian nationalist on the left-hand side. So if you are to the right of Doug Wilson, then this whole thing might be purposeless. But this is an interesting conversation for those of us who are still trying to, and I would include myself in this, trying to figure out our kind of political leanings in terms of how you actually apply these doctrines to politics, because politics makes people stupid, right? Politics reduces things to binaries. Politics reduces things to decisions that perhaps don't make sense in a perfect world, but all of a sudden you have to choose between these two stupid choices. So,
no, I agree. Yeah. No,
I just seen the White Knight comment. But yeah, no. So I think there's value in this conversation. I think it's a very interesting conversation because now you have a kind of libertarian normie Catholic on the right, and you have a Christian nationalist on the left. Talking at a closer point. Again, you would want these two people to talk rather than having, I don't know, Stephen Wolf or someone who's even more extreme come in and talk to the more normie. Then they're almost just completely talking past each other. So the closer they are in perspective, the more interesting the conversation is, and hopefully we can provide some additional context and perspectives that add some interest. I think it's a valuable conversation to have.
About what would be permitted. Your theology takes it takes a straightforwardly patriarchal view of the family, of male headship. This is obviously drawing on some fairly explicit things in the New Testament. You're not pulling it out of the ether. But there is a set of questions about what that implies for women's participation in society. And you mentioned earlier a CNN interview you did, which asked about women voting.
Right.
And you said ideally in families, households would cast a vote, and the decider would be the husband, right? Single women would, if they were heads of household, would have a right to
Correct.
vote, right? So what else would be permitted to husbands in their exercise of patriarchal authority? They would have the right to control and dispose of property.
Reform Renegade, I'm just curious. Just shoot me a message down below. I probably wouldn't go as far as Doug Wilson in some of his kind of political aspirations. So is there any point in reading Stephen Wolf's book on the topic if he is more extreme in terms of what he would bring into politics? Just curious. I mean, I don't know. I could read it, and I'd be happy to go into it as well. But if some of the things that Doug Wilson says in terms of what he would make politically, where he would put the force of government, make me a little bit uncomfortable, would Stephen Wolf, would it even be worth reading? Is it even interesting? Or is it only really for someone who's kind of wrestling between Doug Wilson and a more extreme view? Oh, just curious.
Now, a question that I have, I suppose, like, so if we go through this, which, I mean, we've had this before on the panel, talking about, like, what the ideal, quote-unquote, voting rights would be, right? So whether it's men only, whether it's married men with children, married men with land, right? Whatever that delineation is that even a useful thought exercise if the amount of power it would require to change the voting rights in such a tremendous way would almost and certainly involve a removal of the Constitution, right? Or at least certain amendments, which, like, so the power struggle that it would take, or the amount of power, the amount of majority you would need to enforce or to enshrine these things in law, we would be dealing with a totally different country at that point. Like, because I don't think we can vote our way to this point with a 51% majority.
I mean, you can repeal the 19th without completely repealing the Constitution.
Well,
but no.
Okay, but what is it? What? How do you get to repeal an amendment? Is it 70%?
Yeah, it's a large amount.
I mean, that's a lot of millions of people that kind of need to not be voting anymore, right? for us to make a 70%, right? So that's like a thought exercise, right? So we can say, like, oh, we would like to have these voting rights and these voting rights, but the legitimate power it would take to make it so would kind of negate the fact that we're even in this system to begin with.
Yeah. Well, and again, I mean, in my perspective, doctrinally, I think that there is a legitimate category of autonomous female Christian single woman who's serving God in singleness.
Well, do you
and
follow...
I think that person should get a vote. And so I think the household
Doug
of one woman should get a vote. You know.
Well, but
and therefore, I think
doesn't that imply to all women, though?
It does. It does, because if you allow for the single
we're
woman
still
households,
in the system that we're in now, then.
Yeah, no, basically, I am not in favor of the bill in 19th. I am not.
Oh, okay.
I'm not. No, I'm not. Because for me, if you allow for an autonomous
what
single
about
woman
voting ages?
category,
Can we say for women it has to be 55 and men 25?
Yeah. All right,
we
we
just say
that.
like actually,
Yeah.
you know what? There's a better idea. What if we just raise the voting age to 55 across the board? How about that?
Well, then none of us could vote.
Well, right, but I mean that would be something that I would have to entertain. Like you can't be the what about meism. A lot of times when we talk about voting rights, I dislike. So even if there was a system where it's like men who own land, well, that would knock me out of the equation. But I would be fine with that. Right?
Yeah,
or men over 35, which would also knock me out. But I would also be fine with that.
Right? We should talk about. There's an interesting conversation between Alex O'Connor and a political philosopher or a philosophy doctor who majors in politics. It's not really political. I don't know. I don't know if it's political philosophy. It's not political science. So I guess I don't know if they call that political philosophy or philosophy of politics. But he's talking about how democracy, all the pitfalls of democracy, and I think that's a very interesting conversation because democracy as a good hinges on a lot of presuppositions that are certainly up for debate. But in the end, I do think that democracy has a point. I think that generally speaking, despite the ignorance of the voting population, there is a validity to the intuitions of the majority. I mean, you see this in the betting markets, where oftentimes the betting markets are a better predictor than the highly intelligent, specialized people on a particular topic. The betting markets
Gamblers
are
win again.
Exactly.
Yep.
So I think there is sort of a truth to the more people, the better. But to go back to your point, John, I would be much more in favor of some kind of voting, political testing, or I don't want to say literacy laws,
okay,
but something basically that tests your basic understanding of politics and how things work as a prerequisite for voting. That makes a lot more sense to me.
If we do that, let's say there's an IQ test and an IQ test and a knowledge test. The IQ test of 115.
Okay, no, I don't want IQ test because I don't trust IQ. I think IQ is kind of stupid. It's an
accurate predictor of a lot of things. But
it's an accurate predictor, but that's not.
All right.
Yeah.
But let's even the knowledge test. All right, I think most women would naturally gravitate to things that are not political. Some would, and a higher percentage of men would gravitate. So even with something like that, you are knocking a large portion of women out from voting, right? If there is some sort of literacy taste. Now, I have just a random thought. Do you think democracy and Protestantism is kind of tied together because you have your own individual say on the country, kind of like you have your own individual say on the religion interpretation, so on and so forth? Do you think there's some sort of correlation there? That just thought popped into my mind. There's no backing behind that. I just thought of it just now. Forcing James to do an IQ test.
I would fail an IQ test. I'm a bad standardized test
James would straight up murder me in an IQ test. I absolutely think so.
I don't think so. I think I would completely fail an IQ. I mean, I've never taken one, so I have no idea what they are like. But I standardized tests were never my forte. I can do tests that I know what I'm prepping for very, very well, but standardized tests, like my ACT scores, bad. No, I think that Protestant probably does have Catholics came to an appreciation of democracy very late in their theology. I mean, it's Vatican II or post-Vatican II that you really get an appreciation for democracy as a good in and of itself, which probably is to an extreme of a stance even then. I think the Greeks about 3,000 years ago, it's probably a little bit too far, but at least 2,500 years ago had it pretty much right when they said that there are three basic forms of government, and they all have their goods and their bads, right? You've got dictatorships, you've got aristocracies, and you have democracies, and they all have a good form, right? In the dictator, you have the terrible dictator,
altruistic
the benevolent
leader,
dictator, and then in the aristocracy, you've got the good version of aristocracy and the bad version of aristocracy, and then in the democracy, you have the mob rule that is good and the mob rule that is bad. They all are risky and dangerous, and there's sort of a natural cycle of those things. The American experiment is trying to combine the best of all of those systems into one system, which, again, as an optimist, I tend to think is a good experiment. Perhaps perhaps it'll work.
Question. So if you have a great appreciation for the Constitution and for the beliefs of the founding fathers, wouldn't you necessarily strip the voting rights from women and certain individuals?
The Constitution allowed for amendments. I'm okay with amendments.
Well, right, but I mean, there's all sorts.
Amendment.
There's all sorts of amendments that get used against us later on in life, and I mean,
true. I'm okay with repealing amendments too.
If you look at the forces behind that really wanted the larger, I guess, tax bracket or low income class of individuals to get women into the workplace with this faux suffragette movement. It's like, no, you want equal rights, but really,
my support of women voting is not because I think that women should be. It basically, my support of women voting is because I do think that there is such thing as an autonomous female. And I think that that person probably deserves a vote in society. And I don't think that you should reduce the voting power of a married couple, right? If you only allowed voting by households, and you allow for female only households, right? Like a single woman could be a household, which I do think is a legitimate category. Then if you allow for that woman to vote, but not the wife to vote, then you are now diminishing the voting power of a married couple, which I think is actually a bad idea. So I'd rather have the married couple have 2 votes and the single woman have 1 vote.
It's only the married couple. In my thought experiment, it would only
There's
be the
no
married couple.
single women, period?
Single women aren't allowed to vote. Single men aren't allowed to vote.
Single men. Okay, so you have to be married. Okay, that's an interesting idea. I'd be more in favor of that than just simply
not for full franchise democracy. For instance, if somebody ever says, "Oh, you don't think women should vote," I'd be like, "Well, yeah, but I also don't think most men should vote."
I have no principled disagreement with that. I mean, I have no issue with that on principle.
Yeah.
I mean, practically, I don't know, but like principally, yeah, absolutely. You pick whatever standards you want, and I think that's
as
fine.
far. I think what Doug Wilson is saying. So, like, if you do, like, the only scenario in which I would allow a woman to have a vote is if she was a widow with children, right? No fault of her own, divorced, or not, without a husband, did all of the right things, basically.
I think a skin in the game criteria for voting would be good.
Well, I think everybody's against full franchise. Just congratulations, you're 18, vote away, buddy. Right? I think everybody in here is against full franchise at least.
I'm not. I'd have to see a better system, but I think there probably are conceivable better systems. So,
well,
yes.
Would you say America's better now or better towards the beginning of the founding when there was not full franchise?
Probably the latter. I think my point is I could see worse systems, and so I'd have to see what the alternative is before I say let's get rid of what we currently have.
Imagine a system where it's like, we're a democracy, but you have to take a test, and the test is like the CCP handbook, and you have to pass with 100% to be able to vote, right?
Right.
It's like, sure, that's a worse system. Okay.
And their wives' property. I mean,
I would say, actually, no. I appreciate and would defend the old Christian practice of endowing the wife in a biblical.
And the husband, in spite of being head of the household, would not have access to that money.
That was hers. So basically, I believe that
this is interesting.
It would be wise and prudent.
Women do require special protections under the law. Women do require special protections under the law, and that is an Old Testament principle. And that's an interesting, nuanced part of the Old Testament. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
And I mean equal as the same, right? We are not the same. We have different natures, so we have to be treated
different natures, different. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
For us to have a system of endowment for the wife, that would mean that if a husband just thought he found someone cuter, he would take a serious financial hit.
What about discipline in the household? Do you think that husbands as heads of household should be, again, permitted under the law to use forms of physical coercion?
Absolutely. Of the wife?
Of the wife.
No, absolutely not.
Okay.
No. Call the cop.
A little playful spanking's not a problem.
For a brief second, I thought he was going to say, of course. But I think he was about to say, of course not, which would have been very funny. But, I mean, I think everybody outside of like a few Eastern European countries believe that, spousal abuse isn't cool, right? I think that's just generic. We don't mistreat the people that we love. Now, I mean, as far as like discipline goes, I totally believe in spanking children, disciplining children, stuff like that. Then the wife is like one step above a child, right? So we don't use the same tactics.
Step above. Yeah. Oh dear. No, I'm totally in favor of corporal punishment for children. I wouldn't support it for wives.
Yeah. Well, but I mean, I'm trying to think like how forceful would I ever get with a wife? Like,
yeah.
physically moving them from one spot to another. Like if, I don't know, I mean, there's always a scenario you can construct in which you could be like slightly forceful with somebody. Like if you had to go somewhere immediately and you were like pushing somebody out the door. I think there's somewhere where you could be.
Yes, that's not
physically forceful
discipline.
with
That's a
someone.
different
Yeah.
thing than disciplinary. Yeah. I mean, again, I'm in favor of spanking your wife, but under different contexts.
What did I walk into?
yeah.
Oh my gosh.
But no, I think that I mean, corporal punishment is like not only good but like very good. I am absolutely in favor of spanking kids. I was spanked, and it's not even like so many people that defend spanking are like, oh yeah, I was a really terrible kid, and so I needed spankings to correct me. It's like that's fine, whatever. That's not my argument for spanking. I think that you just spank your kids because I think that is the most humane and the most. It is just the best form of discipline that I am aware of. Right? It is better than timeouts. It is better than taking away their goods. The thing that spanking has to offer is it is immediate. It is quick. It is, it actually might be a violation of YouTube policies. I think there's a specific example they gave about not advocating for spanking, but I don't know.
Oh,
We'll
that's
see.
funny.
If we get shut down, we get shut down.
Well, I mean, I think it's in a way kind of a kindness.
Exactly. It is a quick, it is over with, and you immediately get to the reconciliation. You immediately get to the part where the parent and child can reconcile and be together again. Whereas like a timeout, you've got this extended period of time where you're in there's a breach in the relationship. Which, I mean, I'm not saying that that's completely wrong. That can be that's could be fair and fine. But especially with like being grounded and stuff. Like now what you're talking about a period of weeks or even just days or however long you're grounded. First of all, very rarely do parents actually live up to what they threatened initially, right? They very quickly give in to sort of lenient forms of that.
Called the
grounding.
art of the deal, okay? It's
Right.
we bring them to the table with strong negotiating
Exactly.
tactics, okay?
I think that's it. So you don't even follow through with your threats, but even still, you are the problem with grounding, like you say, you ground someone for a week. Now they have a whole week before they experience any kind of reconciliation, before they've sort of become whole. That to me, I mean, maybe this is a Protestant thing, but to me, I think that spanking is the best way of just demonstrating the quick, immediate consequences of sin, and then immediately getting to that reconciliation where it's like, no, we're good, we're back to normal. Which, now that I think of it, does kind of go against the Catholic tendency towards requiring penance and sort of an ongoing period of external reconciliation. So
I mean, unless you view it as like a confession within the family, right? Sort of like a picture of that almost. And the penance is like, or the punishment to get back into grace is essentially just the action of spanking, right? If you like break it down to like a family dynamic.
I guess. But to me, like the thing about spanking that makes it so good and so useful is I think it just demonstrates how actions have consequences. I mean, these are imposed consequences, right? Once kids get to a certain point, you just let them experience the actual consequences of if they're doing bad things, you just let them experience what happens when you do bad things. I think spanking has an expiration date when it comes to parenting, right? You probably shouldn't be spanking your 16-year-old kid, in my opinion.
Oh, that's a man.
Right, exactly.
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
You just let the 16-year-old kid experience the consequences of his actions. If he's not turning his assignments, you just let him like experience what happens when you fail your class or whatever.
Yeah, and
you don't need to impose consequences beyond a certain point.
problems if your 16-year-old is still requiring like physical punishments that you have failed in some other way leading up to that.
However, I know Christians that are feel that it is important to defend, spanking your kids up to when they're 19 years old or whatever. And it's like, no,
that's absolutely ridiculous.
It is absolutely ridiculous.
At some point you have to let the child, the man be their own man. Yeah, but I mean, for me, spanking or any sort of punishment, it teaches your child consequences to actions, and it prepares them for the real world. Like how cruel is it to not punish your child and let the world do it for you, right? Not only is that child doing things it shouldn't do within the world, but then the world is also going to punish it in a way that it sees fit, and you have not prepared it for any sort of consequences whatsoever. I think in terms of the timed punishments, there is an element of it that I do like in certain cases where it teaches patience and discipline. So for instance, you cannot have XYZ for XYZ period of time. And so you understand the consequences of your actions over a long period of time, or, you don't get it until you make up in a certain way, like you have to make it up to your sister, or you have to write this essay on why it was wrong, or there are certain things that I do like about it for patience and discipline and things like that. So, I mean, I think almost all forms of discipline can be valid in the right circumstance.
Yeah, I think I tend to agree. I just love, to, for a little bit of, indulge me a little bit of psychobabble, but I just love the immediacy and the instant reconciliation that takes place with corporal punishment. I think that it's just a beautiful picture of, you've messed up, here's the consequences, now let's get back to loving each other and doing and move on to acting the way we're supposed to act. And I think what a beautiful way to train your kids, rather than having them stew in what they've done, or having them, get angry at you for the punishments that you've imposed. And there's heart conditions there that can be problematic on both sides. And when it comes to corporal punishment, you have to spank, not in anger, right? I mean, that is an essential part. If you're going to spank your kids, it cannot be out of anger. It cannot be in a state of anger. You need to calm down before you spank your kids. Otherwise, it is a problem. It is bad. It will not generate the correct outcome. When you spank your kids, you have to be in a complete control of your emotions and your anger. Otherwise, it will not have the effect that you want.
And that was a 10-minute diatribe on why James likes spanking so much.
I love spanking.
Devoid of context. I love spanking.
I just walked into that, so I had no input whatsoever. I was so confused.
I gotta go pee. You guys keep watching.
All right, there we go. What are your thoughts on spanking, Christian, or do you think we've covered the topic quite exquisitely?
Yeah, spank your kids. They mess up, spank them.
Based.
Yep.
No physical coercion whatsoever.
No.
Okay, so these are. Go ahead.
So, basically, as a pastor, I've seen all kinds of things, and marital problems can get pretty messy, pretty tangled, pretty quickly. But I believe that the husband does not have the authority legally to exercise any kind of corporal discipline of his wife. No, absolutely not. Now, what happens when the cops are called because there's a domestic thing and he hit her, but she'd been hitting him for 5 minutes? But you've got those sorts of situations. But the Islamic idea of a husband beating his wife and it's okay, it's just simply not okay.
But it's not only an Islamic idea, right? Like if you look at the history of the Christian West, you have.
I think if you look at most history in general, I mean, you can try to pin it down to Islam or Christianity or really any religion, but like spousal quote unquote abuse or discipline is very normal, right? Yeah. Very, very normal. And it was only the Christian West that kind of poo-pooed on that, right? Or like, not in the Indian sense, but said that actually, maybe we shouldn't be having that sort of dynamic within the relationship. So, I mean, well, you can say, oh, well, Christians used to do it too. It's like, yeah. You got to go back in history and find an example. But we're talking about the here and now, aren't we? And what society works best. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's like pulling out something from 472 where, somebody wrote something to somebody about how, yes, you should discipline your wife, and then using that against you now. It's like, come on.
Situations where, one, the law has given the husband pretty much total control over the property of his wife for reasons of headship and patriarchal authority, and at least cultures where it is customary to sort of accept or wink at, sort of the use of physical force by husbands against wives.
Yeah, I would.
So it seems like
I can say in our church.
Yeah.
Well, and as somebody who's been married for 5 years, I have my anniversary in a couple weeks, or in a week, actually, 1 week. Don't forget that. I've never experienced a situation where I was, I gotta beat my wife to do what I want. Like that situation hasn't come up yet, so I'm not saying it's not possible. But as of yet, I just I haven't run into that situation where it's been required for me to beat my wife to get the outcome that I desire or whatnot. I don't know. Maybe that's a skill issue.
Is there a state that still has a law in the books that it's like legal to hit your wife on the courthouse steps on like a Sunday or something? Maybe I'm wrong.
So you're just driving and you're just like the wife is like, "Where are we going?" "Oh, don't worry about it." She sees the courthouse in the distance, is like trying to get out, trying to like open the door, but you've locked it.
I'm gonna look that up. I'm pretty sure it's still on the books.
There's still a book.
Yeah.
And there's lots of weird laws that are on the books. Like you
ones.
can't wait on a street corner with a giraffe on Wednesdays or something like that. It's another one of those weird ones because it happened at some point and people were really annoyed by it. So like, take your giraffe out of here.
Basically, if any husband, and we're like you said, we're patriarchal, and I can envision someone moving to Moscow because I think they're patriarchal, and that must line up with my idea of patriarchy. And if someone like that joined our church, and we found out that he was beating his wife, he would be excommunicated. We'd put him under discipline.
So let me put it to you, and I suspect you'll dispute this, but I'll put it to you that this seems like a situation where a Christian culture can learn something from the experience of the liberal era, more secular era, a more feminist era, in terms of what it's willing to accept and what it's not, right? That there is a way in which it seems like, in saying, no, I wouldn't accept that, and no, I wouldn't accept that. Again, things that many Christians accepted in the past, you are accepting to some degree that if we pass out of this more secular era into a more Christian era, we will look back and say, well, it was bad that we lost the faith and good that we recovered it, but it was also good that in the course of the 20th century, we decided that it was rotten for husbands to beat their wives and maybe a good idea for wives to control some of their own property.
I leave for 2 seconds and I'm getting accused of all kinds of horrible things.
Yeah, well, they came back and they were like, "Hey, post your wife or you're gay."
Yeah.
Hey, James. James, are you in South or in North Carolina?
North Carolina.
Oh, you can't beat your wife on Sundays then. South Carolina, you can.
Is that so?
That's funny. Yeah, I mean, we were talking about this, James, but I mean, it was really like it was normal for most of history for people to punish their wives, right?
Yeah.
And it was really only in the Christian West where that became like, actually, maybe we shouldn't be doing that. So, like, I don't know, James. I've been married. I've been married for almost 6 years, and I haven't ever had an occasion where I'm like, you know what? I really have to beat my wife to get what I want.
No.
James,
James,
have you ever encountered that where you're like, you're looking at her and she's saying something woman speak, and you're like, I have got to beat this girl right now to get what I want?
No, not technically, but there are times when women deserve spankings. And
no, don't bring it back to spankings, please.
I'm
That's
not
not what we're talking about.
I don't mean that way. No, I'm actually talking about punishment. But basically, no, I think you're right. I think that the Christian ethos of maybe men should be bigger and not do that is correct. Basically, you're right. Women do say stupid things, and women are different in some very frustrating ways.
No. In past relationships, I have told women to I've harshly shushed them. I've never, yeah. I think there is a time and place for that, but yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, like, I'm even trying to construct a scenario. Like, I think defensively, like, I'm not the type of guy who says like, "Oh, never hit a girl." No, there are plenty of times to be physically forceful with somebody who's a female. Like, that doesn't bug me at all. But like, unless there's like some immediate threat to yourself or someone else, like physical violence doesn't seem like the most appropriate answer.
No, it isn't, and there is absolutely a reason. I mean, I don't know. It comes to old-fashioned rules of chivalry, and
Dub White has been going hard for 2.5 hours now, and it's so funny.
He's a champ.
Yeah. See, I hope he's keeping up because I'm like 4 whiskeys in. And,
no, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, I'm pretty sure he's about as deep as you are right now.
This is tough. No, but yeah, no, I think that the chivalry, which absolutely comes from Christian, a Christian spirit, is the correct mindset to have towards women. Women are the weaker vessel, and they deserve to be treated as such. And yes, they say stupid things sometimes, and sometimes they make you very, very mad. But you've got to be the bigger man. And yeah, I think that basically a policy of no physical aggression, period, of any sort, whether punitive or yeah, I think that that is correct, and I think that that's just one example of many of men needing to hold themselves to a higher standard when it comes to that sort of thing, and I think that's good. I think that's one of the things that Christian culture has brought to us, that Muslim culture didn't bring to them, and shame on them, but it's one of the reasons why we're better.
Fair.
Yeah, I think wives controlling their own property is an ancient custom among Christians, but
I'm not, and I'm not arguing that all Christians everywhere supported wife beating or anything remotely like that. I am saying that there is a particular 20th century shift around these issues.
Yeah, so
that is driven by what are seen as liberal and feminist concerns.
Yeah, I wouldn't call them liberal and feminist, but I'd say there are certain Western developments that I like.
Okay.
Right. And the way I put this same issue is I've been arguing for a mere Christendom or a Christendom 2.0. Okay. Christendom 1.0 had some bugs in it. I don't want a rerun of Christendom 1.0. Don't want that. The Christians screwed it up in different areas. So nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition, as Monty Python taught us. And I don't want the Spanish Inquisition again. Okay, I want a Christendom that learns lessons from history. And some of those lessons that you learn from history may be, okay, that the person who wrote that book or influenced this legislation, or they may have been a feminist or liberal or whatever. What's important is whether it's just and prudent and right. And if it is, and it aligns with the Bible, then I'm more than happy to go with it.
So just to take a related example, one of the controversies of many that you've been mixed up in has to do with slavery, and whether slavery is absolutely forbidden by the Bible, absolutely forbidden to Christians, or whether it is critiqued but allowed for. And you think it is critiqued but allowed for. On this, on a straightforward reading of the New Testament, I would agree with you. I would say pretty clearly there is a pretty clear path from the message of the Bible.
We've talked about this a little bit, but I do think that this is probably, I mean, Wilson's take on this is very in line with a lot of Protestant thinkers in the pre-Civil War era. So that's fair. I mean, there's some very great theologians that would fall right in line with him, including some of the Princetonian theologians. I think one of the Hodges was similarly aligned, if not both of them. I do think that ultimately, I mean, doctrine does develop, to use the term from Cardinal Newman, and I do think that the biblical warrant for a complete erosion and elimination of the concept of slavery, meaning one person is treated as property of another, which has undergone many different permutations, and you know, certainly in Roman times was not as bad as chattel slavery in the American South, perhaps. But I do think that concept of people being treated as property is does go against the biblical principle of the Imago Dei, the man being made in the image of God. I think that is ultimately the doctrine that ultimately eliminates slavery as being a valid option, period. And that's my perspective. So I do not think that slavery is ever an intrinsically valid option, because man is made in the image of God and should not be treated as property. And that is something that it took Christians a long time to determine, to figure out, to develop that doctrine. But I think that when that doctrine developed, I think that it is correct, and I think that that is part of our tradition that we should include and understand and appreciate. And so, I don't know exactly what Doug says after this, but I think that there is absolutely a even traditional argument to be made for slavery as being inherently wrong, even though I agree in the New Testament it doesn't seem to be completely abrogated, but I do think that one can take biblical principles and come to the conclusion that slavery is wrong.
Yeah, I think the bones of of that idea is certainly within the Bible, even if it is not explicitly condemned. And I think it's also like there is a little bit of context there within the time frame we're talking about, right? Where slavery now in the first world is a very different proposition to first century. Yes, it's you were a slave or you were dead, basically, right?
Right, which seems like slavery seems like the better alternative of the two. So
right,
I totally understand that.
Yeah.
To the abolition of slavery, but there is no moment in the New Testament when Jesus insists on the manumission of slaves. Paul says, "Slaves, obey your masters in the Lord."
Right.
So I think it's true that the Bible alone does not say an absolute no to slavery.
Right.
But I also think that it is possible for Christians to develop their thinking in ways that are rooted in Scripture that lead to the statement, no, this should be absolutely forbidden.
That I would say not only leads to it, but necessarily leads to it. So I believe the logic of Scripture, which when you preach the gospel, you're preaching the gospel of liberty, and you can't preach the gospel of liberty to centuries of clanking chains. Right? The gospel brings liberty. So the issue there is, what do you do in the middle of a pagan slave-owning society? Paul didn't arrive in Rome and start circulating petitions about slavery. He was playing the long game, and he taught masters and slaves how to treat one another. And so I believe that the logic of the gospel.
Mm-hmm. Do you? This is wading into theology that I probably should not be wading into at midnight, 4 whiskeys in, but probably 5 whiskeys in at this point. Do you think that Paul, assuming that slavery is inherently bad, as is sort of the modern conception, even within the Catholic Church, do you think that Paul knew that at the time he wrote Scripture? Was he simply not wanting to be overly provocative, or did he not know that? Like, basically, so the question is, do we allow for a certain amount of apostolic ignorance?
Well, I mean, I think that most of the church would believe in a progressive revelation. Like, even the canon of Scripture, right, was not compiled until 300, 400 years later. So of course there were things that they were simply not not aware of, at the time. And I think that there were some things that were quite controversial at the time, saying that neither slave nor free, there's no distinction right between them, whereas these people would probably see a distinction within social class, at least between these people. Right. So I think that there are some revolutionary statements within Scripture at the time, but I think that there is a very fine line that Paul walks, especially saying, like, to the Greeks, I'm a Greek, to the Jew, I'm a Jew, basically, and he's trying to be somewhat sensitive and not completely upset, because they never advocated for an overturning of the Roman system, right?
Right.
And I think that is kind of important, because to remove slavery at the time would have been a revolutionary movement, which would have almost certainly got them all killed, even though they all ended up dying anyways. But yeah, that would have been a much harsher reaction.
Do you think that Paul thought that slavery... All right, okay, this is a two-part question. So part one, do you think that slavery is inherently wrong?
No. It can't be inherently wrong if you can contextually... I can create a scenario in which, Mad Max apocalypse, warring tribes are fighting over each other. They both absolutely hate each other, but one side has to win. The side that wins decides not to kill all of the other people, but they are in servitude, quote unquote, slavery to the other people because they've decided not to kill them, right? Even with limited resources, they've decided to not kill them, because if they just sent them away, they would all just die in the desert. But you decided to keep them in quote unquote servitude as what would be technically a slave, right? So I can construct a scenario in which slavery kind of works and is the more moral of two options.
That doesn't seem like the same thing per se, because that's like
no, but I'm saying
yes,
if you say
we're
inherently.
Well, no, I understand, right. So if you're saying that, okay, I would think under some definitions of slavery, I would say that inherently slavery is wrong, right? I do not think that people should be treated as property, period. So inherently wrong. However, I'm in favor of using prison camps as labor forces. I don't have a problem with exploiting,
which is what these people would be in my hypothetical scenario, essentially, right?
So I'm not sure that we're actually disagreeing, and yet I would say slavery is inherently wrong in terms of treating people as not people but as property. I think that's wrong. I don't know that using prisoners as labor is necessarily the same thing as slavery, although it certainly
even
could
though
look
we're
very
forcing
similar.
them to do things against their will.
Well, so forcing people to do things against their will is not inherently wrong. If that's all you mean, then there are certainly times to do that. But treating people as property is
we give them numbers and assign them all. You know, there's some similarities there. So I mean, yeah, I mean, if you want to be incredibly strict. Like, would that fall? Like, what do you think about like indentured servitude? Okay, if you enter into a contract, have you now given up your rights as a person and you can be treated as property? Like, do you think that that's all right? Because we can get very, very granular with it.
Yeah, I'm not sure that that's slavery. Although perhaps if you really are not just engaging in a contract, but actually giving up your personhood even for a period of time, that probably is akin to slavery and probably is inherently wrong. Yeah, I think treating people as property, even for a period of time, is wrong.
You can kill people, though. So I can end their life, but I can't treat them.
But that's because they forfeited certain rights. That's not because...
What if they forfeited rights to not be treated
the right
as property?
To be treated as people.
Well,
yeah.
I mean, like if they attempted to kill me and my family, but instead of me killing them, the other opportunity...
You still treat them as people, even if I'm killing someone who
yeah, but they treated their slaves as people. And they said, you know, to be kind to your slaves, and you need to show them mercy and grace the same way God has shown you mercy and grace, right? So,
yeah. So, like I said, I'm not opposed to forcing people to do labor for you under certain circumstances. So that is not that. If that's your definition of slavery, that is not necessarily inherently wrong. However, treating people as property rather than people is inherently wrong. So you're right.
Do you treat
it's a hard line to draw.
Yeah, no, it's very, very complicated. Now, to your point, do I think that Paul thought all slavery was wrong? I would say no.
No, probably not. Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
But I think he would say it was wrong under certain conditions, and I would think that, like to Philemon, he gave him like express commandments to do. Right, and if he had violated those,
one of which was go back to his master, right? So,
well, correct, but he also like had instructions for the master as well, right? So they almost had like this contract with each other in this way, which is a weird dilemma because I think, I
mean, Paul's pretty clear: slaves obey your masters. Like, you know, if you wanna avenge the injustice, then heap burning coals on their head by serving them better. You know, it's like so. Again, I think you get to a distinction between how you are to individually act and perhaps how the principle could be constructed. But I think I certainly, in my theology, I do not see a need to see Paul as being perfectly cognizant of all of the doctrine that would end up being developed upon what he had infallibly written, right? And so I think that he wrote plenty to initially abolish slavery, as you know, to instantiate the modern day conception of slavery as being inherently wrong in terms of seeing people as property. And yet he might not have known that at the time or in that sense. Although I think you're right. I think he had enough, you know, sense to see that some forms of slavery and some actions that would be committed under a slave society would absolutely be violating God's laws.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Because I mean, I think also a lot of it's different in the Christian context where we view this life as very temporary. So it is much better to be a slave following Christ than a ruler of all nations, right?
Absolutely.
So I think that there is always an element of that where, as like a atheists or secular people, was like, no, it's so indignant. Like, how could you do this? How could any of this stuff happen? But like, you know, for us, if that's your lot in life, you kind of have to be okay with that in some way, which is kind of strange. It's foreign. It's a foreign concept to a lot of modern thought.
Yeah.
Like if you told a modern secularist, "Oh, you're gonna be marched to death as a first century martyr," they'd be like, "Well, no, of course not. I would never do that. Why would I ever do that? That's such a violation of my personal rights." But as a Christian, you're like, "Oh, that's my lot in life. Fair enough. There we go."
Yeah. I mean, and that's the Christian life. We live for a higher purpose, and
it's literally what you signed up for.
Yeah, exactly.
Let James talk. I want to giggle. That's probably the gayest thing said so far, and it's from you, Dubwide. That's funny.
Dubwide, I really appreciate you. I think this is the first time you've been here. I don't know if this is your first stream or just your first stream commenting, but good to have you in the group.
Oh yeah. We're closing in on the 3-hour mark, gents, and we are 40 minutes into this video, which is actually further than I thought we would make it.
We're pretty far. We're basically at the end. Should we finish this thing?
No, dude. There's 30 minutes, 35 minutes left of content, which at this rate would take another 3 hours.
Yeah.
It's been a really good platform for discussion, though. So I've really enjoyed that element of it. But
I've had a good time.
I'm not nocturnal, boys, so
I'm kind of excited to talk about Candace Owens next week. That's going to be fun because like the amount of down the rabbit hole that she has done in wacky and weird ways is very, very fun. So that
Indeed.
Everything there's like 1.4 billion Catholics, man. There's gonna be like every single video we've done has been a bad, just a shitty Catholic.
Oh, also, well, she does claim to be Catholic, doesn't she?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Her husband is Catholic too. Yeah.
Speaking of slaves, Candace Owens next week on the docket. Oh, wait.
And hopefully a Halloween themed show. We were gonna do that this week, but we thought maybe we could actually push that out to some point next week. We have to officially schedule it.
Thursday?
I think it's a Friday. Yeah. So
Friday.
We're thinking tentatively Thursday. We'll see if that actually plays out. We were gonna try to have a show this past Thursday, but ended up we were gonna have a guest, but the guest had some personal emergencies, and so we ended up canceling. That's fine. But yeah, possibly this Thursday. Set your calendars. Hopefully, be ready around 9 a.m. Eastern time or 9 p.m. Eastern time. But no guarantees. But we're going to try to have a Halloween themed show where we'll talk through some spooky stories, and we've all watched Nefarious at this point. John, have you seen it yet?
I haven't seen it yet. I forgot we were supposed to see it by the 26th. So, but I'll watch it.
You got an extension. Yeah.
Don't watch it before you go to bed. I'm telling you, I couldn't sleep a little bit afterwards. Maybe I'm just a pussy, but I don't know, man.
Dude, I used to watch. Yeah. I used to watch. Oh, is that broken? My stream alerts are broken, but we did get a Ko-Fi before we go.
Ooh,
but we got a couple Ko-Fis actually.
Oh man, check them out.
But yeah, I used to watch every Friday night. We'd watch like a scary movie in like high school, college days. But yeah, let me.
It's not like a jump scare movie at all. It's just like oh creepy. Wow, this is true.
Psychological.
Yeah.
Right. That's the worst part about it. That it feels more real. Like yeah.
Noob Crastinator over on Ko-Fi became a member. It says, thanks for the support, gents. Well, thank you very much, Noob Crastinator. That is our top Semitic donator. Appreciate it, sir. Noob Crastinator is one of my top guys. I think it was just one. I think it was just the one. Okay, yeah.
I thought I saw two.
I saw two, but it's because I clicked the button. But it was supposed to pop up. Wow. It was supposed to pop up a stream alert on my OBS, but it did not. Okay. And I don't know. Right. It hasn't been working for me the last couple weeks though, so it's busted. I tried to get it to work, but
fair enough. Well, we are monetized now on Ko-Fi, and YouTube officially allows super chats now. So if you'd like to support the channel, you are welcome to do so. Although we generally read comments whether you submit them as super chats or not. So no pressure to do so. But if you'd like to support the channel, super chats are appreciated.
Hook says, read The Secret Histories, the biography of Justinian if you want to desensitize yourself. Oh yeah, if you want to like get into the history of some of the Gnostic sects and some of the other wacky shenanigans and rituals that were going on early days, I think there's lots of material there for creepy stuff.
If I'm not wrong, Justinian was the one who basically. Okay, Dub, I don't know what you're saying. I'm shilling for who? What am I shilling for?
He's shilling for big more.
Wild attacks. No, but Justinian was the one who basically instantiated Roman code, like the Roman law as we know today, which is a huge influence on most European countries' code of law, including France, Spain. I mean, like a lot of these countries, they use Roman law as opposed to English common law. That is a product of the law that was written down and, instantiated by Justinian, the emperor of Rome in, I don't know, the 4th, 5th century. So, yeah.
4th century, late 4th century, right? 387, something like that.
Sounds right. Yeah. Cool beans. All right, so hopefully you'll see us maybe Thursday, at the very least next Sunday. And yes, we do want to talk about Candace Owens as well as perhaps some other more cringy right wing.
James, you should go blackface and dress up as Candace Owens for the stream, dude.
I don't think that is a good
idea. Have your wife do blackface and be up here like, you don't get to ask those questions.
A little fake and gay. A little fake and gay. We'll not have any fake and Gary on this.
That's true.
Alrighty. Well, thank you all for being here. We've had a steady attendance, at least 40 or 50 people here the entire time. We appreciate it. We are so grateful for all of you, all of your comments, all of your likes. If you haven't liked the stream yet, go ahead and hit that like button before you go. And yeah, we really appreciate you all being here. We appreciate the community that we've built. And hey, this is just a good time. We all have a blast every Sunday. And yeah, we'll see you next week. God bless.
God bless, gents.